7 men rejected her, and here she is again. The whisper cut through the crowd like a blade. Eleanor Hayes didn't move. She stood at the end of that platform, knuckles white around her worn leather suitcase jaw set like iron, 29 years old, and already written off by an entire frontier town. 7 times she had prepared herself. 7 times she had watched other women get chosen while she rode home alone in the dust. But today, William Carter, the richest cowboy in 3 counties, rode in, walked past every woman on that platform, and stopped directly in front of her. The crowd stopped breathing. Subscribe now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Eleanor's story travels. The morning of Eleanor Hayes' 8th appearance on the Red Valley Bride platform began the same way every other one had, with silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that settles over a room when people are content and still. This was the silence that lands on a crowd when they don't know whether to feel embarrassed for someone or simply relieved they aren't her. Eleanor felt it the moment she stepped onto the wooden planks. She felt it in the way the other women shifted away from her. She felt it in the way the platform matron, a wide woman named Mrs. Greer, pressed her lips together and wrote something in her ledger without looking up. She felt it in the particular quality of the morning air itself, that dry, dusty Red Valley heat that seemed to carry whispers the way other places carried birdsong. She set her suitcase down, straightened her spine, and looked out at the crowd gathering below. 8 times. 8 mornings exactly like this one, and not one of them had broken her. She had decided that a long time ago. They would not break her. Not the rejections, not the whispers, not the slow, terrible arithmetic of watching every other woman on that platform get chosen while she remained at the end of the line, holding the same worn leather bag, riding the same rented wagon back to the same rented room above the general store. She was 29 years old. In Red Valley, 1885, that was already a problem. A woman of 29 who had never been chosen was a woman the town had already categorized. They had a shelf for her, a neat little label, and they had placed her on it long ago. Too old for a first marriage, too hardened by life for a man who wanted something soft and easy. Too much history behind her eyes for men who preferred women who hadn't learned yet what the world could do to you. Eleanor knew what the world could do to you. She had been learning since she was 14 years old, standing at her father's bedside, while a fever took him piece by piece, listening to the doctor tell her mother there was nothing more to do. She had been learning when she was 16, and her mother followed him, not from illness, but from grief, the slow kind that sits in the chest and squeezes until there is nothing left. She had been learning every year after that, running the family's small farm with her younger brother Samuel until the drought came and the debt collectors followed, and she sold everything they could sell just to keep the land that kept them alive. Samuel had eventually married and moved north. Eleanor had stayed. She had always stayed. She did not know how to be someone who walked away from something before it was finished. That stubbornness, and she heard it called stubbornness plenty, had kept her alive through things that should have crushed her. She had kept a farm running through 3 brutal winters. She had negotiated with creditors who did not expect a woman to know the numbers. She had hired workers and managed wages and fixed fence lines in weather that kept men twice her size indoors. She had built a life. It simply wasn't a life anyone standing on a bride platform was willing to look at.
Just here now.
Mrs. Greer finally looked up from her ledger. Miss Hayes. Her voice had that particular flatness of a woman who had moved well past judgment into something colder. You understand the process. Stand in your assigned position. You'll be introduced in order. I know the process, Eleanor said. This is your 8th time. I know that too. Mrs. Greer studied her for a moment the way a person studies a stain they can't quite remove. I want to be direct with you. I'd prefer it. The men who come to Red Valley for a bride are looking for certain qualities: youth, gentleness, the ability to look pretty and not ask too many questions. Eleanor finished. Mrs. Greer's mouth tightened. I was going to say adaptability. So was I, Eleanor said. Just more honestly. The silence that followed was different from the crowd's silence. This one had edges. Mrs. Greer wrote something else in her ledger. Stand in your position, Miss Hayes. Yet, the other women on the platform were younger. That was always true, and Eleanor had stopped letting it sting 2 or 3 mornings ago, the second or third attempt she couldn't remember exactly. There was a girl named Clara who couldn't have been more than 19 with copper hair and a smile that came so easily it looked like breathing. There were 2 sisters from Tennessee who held hands and whispered to each other and giggled when the crowd grew. There was a widow from Abilene who was perhaps 25, which made her the second oldest woman on the platform by a considerable distance. Eleanor stood at the end of the line. She always stood at the end of the line. It wasn't assigned that way. It happened naturally, the way water finds the lowest point without being told where to go. The other women drifted away from her without discussing it, the same way a crowd makes space for someone carrying something heavy, or someone they cannot quite look at directly. She heard one of the Tennessee sisters whisper something to the other. She didn't catch the words. She didn't need to. She kept her eyes on the crowd. Because there was one thing Eleanor Hayes had learned after 7 rejections on this platform. One thing that had kept her returning when any sensible person would have stopped. She was looking for a specific kind of man. Not the richest one. Not the handsomest one. Not the one with the biggest reputation or the most land or the steadiest voice. She was looking for the one who looked at the end of the line. Most of them didn't. Most of them came down that road, scanned the platform from left to right, made their assessments in the first 30 seconds, and spent the rest of the morning confirming what they had already decided. The younger women with the easier smiles got chosen. The men shook hands with Mrs. Greer, signed their names, and rode away with their new brides without once looking back at the woman at the end of the line. 7 times. 7 men. Eleanor had memorized them, the way you memorize things you don't want to forget. Not because they're worth remembering, but because forgetting felt like giving them something they didn't deserve. The first one was a cattle rancher named Hollis, who looked at her face for exactly 3 seconds and then kept walking. The second was a merchant from the next county over who asked her age, heard it, and walked even faster. The third stopped long enough to say, "You seem like a hard woman," and moved on, which she suspected he meant as an insult, and she chose to take as a compliment. The fourth didn't stop at all. The fifth asked whether she had family heard about the farm, about the debts, about Samuel leaving, and his expression shifted into something that looked almost like sympathy before he turned away. The sixth was older than she expected and had kind eyes, and she had allowed herself just briefly to feel something like hope before he chose Clara's copper hair and easy smile. The seventh told Mrs. Greer loudly enough for Eleanor to hear that he didn't want a woman who had clearly already had a difficult life, because difficult lives had a way of making women difficult. She had ridden home from that one without speaking. But she had come back. Because giving up would hurt more than trying again. That was what she believed. That was the thing she held on to in the rented room above the general store in the dark hours, when the belief frayed and the doubt worked its fingers through the gaps. It would hurt more to stop. It would hurt more to sit in that room and know she had decided she wasn't worth one more attempt. So she had gotten up, put on the same dress, packed the same suitcase, and come back to stand at the end of the line. The first prospective groom arrived around 9 in the morning. Eleanor didn't know his name. She never knew their names beforehand. Mrs. Greer kept that information close, the way she kept everything close. He was a solidly built man in his 30s, sun-browned and quiet, with the particular walk of someone used to covering long distances on foot. He came down the road with a wagon and a companion, probably a hired hand or a neighbor who'd come for company. He stepped onto the platform at Mrs. Greer's direction, walked the line. He paused at the Abilene widow, spoke with her for several minutes. Then he moved on, and Eleanor watched his eyes traveling, and she kept her expression neutral, the way she had learned to, not closed off, not cold, just steady. The way a wall is steady, not unfriendly but not fragile either. He reached the end of the line. He looked at her. She looked back. "How old?" he asked. 29, she said. He nodded once. Something in his expression shifted, not unkind exactly, but resolute, as if he had confirmed what he expected to confirm. He walked back to the Abilene widow, Eleanor breathed out slowly through her nose. 1. She had been at this long enough to understand that the rejections didn't happen because she was broken. She understood that now in a way she hadn't when it first started. They happened because the men coming to this platform had a picture in their heads, a specific picture, a young woman, a soft woman, a woman whose life had not yet written itself on her face, and she did not match the picture. It wasn't that she was less. It was that she was different, and different required a man who was willing to look twice. 7 men had looked once. She was waiting for the man who looked twice. By mid-morning, Clara had been chosen. The 2 Tennessee sisters had both been spoken for by brothers from the same property. Eleanor overheard this arrangement with something that felt almost like admiration. Because however you felt about the situation, getting 2 sisters placed together took an unusual kind of thoughtfulness. The Abilene widow was still in conversation with 3 different men. Eleanor watched the way she handled it, gracious without being eager, interested without being desperate. She was going to be fine. Eleanor could see it. The platform was thinning. Eleanor remained at the end of the line. Mrs. Greer had stopped pretending not to look at her. The crowd below, and there was always a crowd because Red Valley treated bride selection days as a kind of informal social event, had shifted its attention in that particular way. A crowd's attention shifts when the dramatic part of the day has resolved and all that remains is the uncomfortable ending. People were still there, but they'd started conversations with each other, buying things from the vendor carts, letting their gaze slide across Eleanor and then away again without quite settling. That particular form of invisibility was something Eleanor had spent years learning to carry without flinching. She was carrying it now. And then the road changed. She heard it before she saw it. Not the sound of one wagon, but several moving together with the particular rhythm of a well-organized outfit, horses that were well-fed and well-kept wheels that didn't rattle with neglect, the kind of sound that came from someone who took care of what they owned. The crowd below seemed to register it before she could identify the source, heads turning toward the main road in that collective way a crowd moves when something worth watching approaches. Mrs. Greer turned. Eleanor turned. 3 wagons. 6 riders flanking them in the kind of loose protective formation that wasn't showy, but was deeply purposeful. The horses were exceptional, not the serviceable animals most men in the territory rode, but animals that had been selected for quality and tended accordingly. The lead wagon was driven by a man Eleanor couldn't quite make out at this distance, just a shape and a hat, and the ease of someone who was accustomed to arriving places and having that arrival mean something. The crowd wasn't invisible anymore. The crowd was watching. Eleanor heard the name before she could see his face clearly. She heard it the way you hear something you've encountered before without knowing you've encountered it. A name that exists in the background of a place, part of the texture of how people talk about things, what's possible and what isn't, what someone with real resources looks like. Carter, someone in the crowd said. The word landed differently than words usually land. William Carter. She'd heard the name. Everyone in 3 counties had heard the name. He owned the largest ranch in the territory, not the second largest, not a large ranch the largest. He had rebuilt it from something modest after his first wife passed, and whatever grief that cost him, he had apparently turned some portion of it into the kind of focused, relentless work that doubled land and tripled cattle, and built a reputation that traveled ahead of the man himself. He had never come to a bride selection day. Eleanor knew that because Mrs. Greer had mentioned it not directly to her, but she had overheard it once, the way she overheard most useful things in Red Valley, by being quiet in a room where people assumed she wasn't listening. Mrs. Greer had told someone that William Carter had been approached numerous times by families wanting to make arrangements by women of standing and means and beauty, and he had politely, firmly declined every single one of them. Nobody knew why he had come today, but he was here, and the crowd knew it. He stepped off the lead wagon with the economy of movement that Eleanor associated with men who had been doing physical work for decades. No wasted motion. Nothing theatrical, just a person getting down from a wagon with the ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. He spoke to one of his riders briefly, something quiet that Eleanor couldn't hear. Then he handed the reins to someone else and turned toward the platform. She saw his face clearly for the first time. He was older than she expected, or perhaps exactly as old as she should have expected. Somewhere past 40, she guessed, with the weathering that came not from hardship, but from years of outdoor work, combined with years of carrying serious responsibility. Not a handsome face in the way that word usually gets deployed, but a face that was honest and precise, the kind of face that looked like it told the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable. He had dark eyes that moved with a quality Eleanor recognized, because she had spent years trying to cultivate it herself. He was actually looking, not performing the act of looking, not scanning for the picture in his head, looking. He took in the platform the way someone takes in a situation they are approaching carefully. Mrs. Greer descended from the platform to meet him with a speed Eleanor had never witnessed from that woman. She crossed the distance between the platform stairs and William Carter's position with something that could only be described as controlled urgency. "Mr. Carter." Her voice had changed. Everything about her had changed. "We're honored you've—" "Mrs. Greer." His voice was unhurried. Not rude, just complete. Like he didn't need anything added to it. "I won't need a formal introduction. I'd just like to walk the platform if that's acceptable." "Of course," Mrs. Greer said. "Of course, yes. Right this way." Eleanor watched him come up the steps. She kept her expression exactly as it was. Steady. He walked the line the way the others had, but differently. The others had moved with the briskness of men, eliminating options, checking boxes, confirming decisions they'd already mostly made. William Carter moved like someone who was genuinely looking for something, which is a very different quality of movement. He paused at the first woman, spoke to her, listened to her answer, not the performative listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but actual listening, the kind where your whole face shifts slightly when the other person talks. Then he moved to the next. Eleanor watched him work down the line. She noticed the way each woman straightened when he reached her, and the way they relaxed slightly when he moved on, not with relief, but with a specific kind of disappointment, the kind that is small and private and quickly folded away. He was not a man who was difficult to stand before. He was not intimidating in the way wealth sometimes makes men intimidating. But he was serious, and seriousness in a man who is making a real decision has a weight to it. He reached the end of the line. He stopped in front of Eleanor. And he looked at her the way she had been waiting for 8 months and 7 rejections for someone to look at her. Not through her. Not at the space beside her. Not at the version of her he'd already decided on before he arrived. At her. 8 times, he said. Eleanor's breath caught. She kept her face steady. "Excuse me, you've stood on this platform 8 times, William Carter said. Not as an accusation, not as a curiosity, as a fact he had considered before arriving. "I asked Mrs. Greer about the platform who the regulars were. Your name came up." "I'm sure it did," Eleanor said. With what attached to it, something in his expression shifted. Not a smile exactly, but the beginning of the recognition that she was not going to play a particular game with him. "With the information that you've come back 7 times after being passed over, and that today is the 8th. "That's accurate." "Why?" It was the same question Mrs. Greer asked, but it wasn't the same question at all. Mrs. Greer had asked it with exhaustion and a certain professional frustration. William Carter asked it the way you ask a question you genuinely do not know the answer to, which is the only honest reason to ask anything. Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Because giving up would hurt more than trying again," she said. The crowd below had gone quiet. She was aware of it distantly. The way you're aware of weather changing something in the air. A shift in pressure, the particular attention of people who can tell something is happening that doesn't usually happen. William Carter didn't move. He looked at her for a long moment with those precise, unhurried eyes, and she had the unusual experience of not being able to fully read what was behind them. Not because he was hiding something, but because what was behind them was complex enough that it didn't resolve into a simple expression. "That's the most honest answer I've heard in a long time," he said. "I've had a lot of time to work out what's true," Eleanor said. He tilted his head slightly. "How old are you?" 29. "Good." She blinked. She couldn't help it. In 8 months of this particular process, the number 29 had never once prompted the word good. "Beg your pardon? I need someone who's already learned things," he said. "A woman who's never been tested isn't what I'm looking for. Anyone can be pleasant in good weather." The breath she took was steadier than she expected. "What are you looking for then, Mr. Carter?" He didn't answer immediately, which she was learning was characteristic. He considered things before he spoke them, and he spoke them once, and that was that. "Someone who can stand beside me," he said. "Not behind me, not in front of me. Beside me. There's a difference." "I know the difference," Eleanor said. "I believe you do," he said. "I'd like to speak with you further, Miss Hayes," she said. "Eleanor Hayes. Miss Hayes." He said it like he was filing it somewhere he would not lose it. "I'd like to offer you a formal courtship if you're willing." The silence from the crowd below had become something else entirely. Eleanor was aware that every person on that platform, and every person watching, had just become a witness to something. She also became aware in the same moment of Mrs. Greer standing 6 feet away, with an expression that had moved through surprise and was now attempting to reassemble itself into professional neutrality, and failing entirely. "I'm willing," Eleanor said. What she didn't expect was how difficult that afternoon would become. She had expected the crowd to lose interest once William Carter left the platform. She had expected to be simply overlooked again, which was at least familiar. Instead, she walked through Red Valley with the very specific experience of being talked about in real time. She heard it at the water pump when she went to fill her pitcher. 2 women she recognized from churchwomen who had always looked past her with the practiced ease of people who have categorized someone and don't intend to revise Carter. He chose that woman. "Did you see the others on the platform? Clara's been waiting for months." She heard it at the general store, where she bought the small things she could afford to buy: a length of thread, a bar of soap. The storekeeper's wife, who had been perfectly civil to her in a transaction-based way for the better part of a year, suddenly had questions. Entirely too many questions, phrased with the particular sweetness of someone trying to determine whether something is real before they decide how to feel about it. "So Mr. Carter actually spoke to you directly, for how long?" "Long enough," Eleanor said. "And he mentioned a courtship. He used that word specifically." "He did." "Well." The storekeeper's wife rearranged something on the counter that didn't need rearranging. "That's certainly surprising." Eleanor paid for her thread and her soap and walked out. She had learned a long time ago that surprising people was not the same as pleasing them, and that the distance between the two was where most of life's complications lived. He came to her rented room that evening. She hadn't expected that either. She had expected a formal letter, the sort of arrangement that typically followed a platform introduction, a meeting at the boarding house parlor, or perhaps at the minister's, something supervised and procedural. Instead, there was a knock at her door at 7 in the evening, and when she opened it, William Carter was standing in the hallway with his hat in his hand. He looked different without the wagon and the riders, and the weight of that arrival. He looked like a man, which sounds like a simple thing, but Eleanor had been around enough men performing versions of themselves that recognizing an unperformed one felt significant. "I should have sent a note," he said. "I don't usually do things this way." "What way?" "Arriving at a woman's door in the evening without an invitation." "Consider yourself invited," Eleanor said. "I'm not interested in the other way either. Do you want to come in?" He glanced at the narrow hallway, the thin walls. "Is there somewhere we could walk?" They walked. Red Valley had a road that ran along the creek and ended at a cottonwood stand that was the closest thing the town had to a park. Eleanor had walked it dozens of times alone in the evenings when the heat broke and the light turned gold, and the sound of the water was enough to make the rented room above the general store feel less temporary. She walked it now with the richest man in 3 counties, and neither of them spoke for a while, which should have felt uncomfortable, and instead felt like the first honest thing that had happened to her all day. "I want to tell you something," William said eventually. "I figured you would. I don't want you to think I chose you because the platform was running low on options." Eleanor looked at him sideways. "It was running low. It wasn't running low on anything I was looking for," he said flatly. "There were 3 women on that platform today I could have had a perfectly adequate marriage with. I'm not interested in adequate." "What are you interested in?" He stopped walking. She stopped too. The creek made its sound. The light in the cottonwoods did what evening light does. "My ranch is 42,000 acres, he said. "I have 63 employees. I manage more cattle than most men see in a lifetime. I have more money than I can spend and more land than I can walk in a week." He paused. "And I come home to an empty house every night." Eleanor was quiet. "My wife died 4 years ago," he continued. "She was a good woman. I'm not going to speak badly of her or pretend the marriage was something it wasn't. But she didn't understand the ranch. She didn't want to. She understood her home and her garden, and I respected that. When she died," he stopped, started again. "When she died, I understood that the next time I chose a companion, I needed to choose someone who could stand in the same world I stand in. Not wait for me in a separate one." "And you think I can stand in your world?" Eleanor said. It wasn't a question, but it wasn't a certainty either. It was something in between, something she was turning over. "I think you've already been standing in a harder one," he said. "For a long time. Alone." She felt the truth of that settle in her chest with a weight she hadn't expected. "You don't know me," she said. "No." He agreed. "That's what courtship is for. And if you know me and decide you were wrong, then we'll deal with that honestly and part without bitterness," he said. "I'm not interested in binding anyone to something they regret." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "That might be the most reasonable thing anyone has said to me in years," she said. Something in him shifted, a lightening barely perceptible. "I've had years to think about what I should have said the first time." The courtship began formally the following week. What it looked like in practice was this. William sent a wagon for her on Monday mornings, and she rode out to his ranch, spent the day learning its systems and people and rhythms, and rode back to town before dark. They talked throughout these days, but not the way Eleanor had imagined courtship conversations working. They didn't discuss feelings. They didn't discuss the future in abstract terms. They discussed specific things: how the water rights dispute on the eastern property was being handled, what the shortfall in the late-season cattle count might mean for winter planning, why 3 of the bunkhouse workers had left in the same month, and whether that was a management problem or a wage problem. William talked to her the way he talked to people he worked with. She found this unexpectedly deeply comforting. She was not being managed. She was not being handled. She was not being shown things with the particular pride of a man showing off his possessions. She was being included in the actual substance of his life, and the actual substance was complicated and uncertain and full of decisions that didn't have clean answers, and that was exactly how real life worked. She started to understand the ranch. More importantly, she started to understand that she could be useful here, not in the way she had expected to be useful, managing a household, cooking and cleaning, and maintaining the kind of domestic order that was the primary value most men sought in a wife. Those things were true too, and she didn't resent them. But William Carter's operation was large enough that the organizational work alone was its own full vocation, and Eleanor had been managing organizational work since she was 16 years old. By the 3rd week, she found a discrepancy in the supply ledger. She almost didn't mention it. Old habit. The habit of staying quiet when you weren't sure whether your observation was wanted, the habit of making yourself smaller when being larger might be misread. But she had decided somewhere in the past 8 months of refusing to let herself be made invisible, that she was going to stop making herself smaller. "Your supply cost for the eastern pasture equipment is wrong," she said during the ride back toward town on a Wednesday afternoon. "The figure in the October ledger doesn't match what I counted in the shed." William turned to look at her. By how much? About $40, possibly more. I'd need to look at the September records to be certain. He was quiet for a moment. Who has access to those records? Based on the filing system, your foreman, your head cook, and whoever you've had keeping accounts. I've had 3 different people keeping accounts in the past year, William said. That would do it, Eleanor said. He looked at her steadily. Eleanor. Yes. Would you be willing to take over the account management? She didn't answer immediately. Not because she was uncertain. Because the moment had a weight she wanted to acknowledge properly before she moved through it. Are you asking because you trust my judgment? She said carefully. Or because it's convenient? Both, he said. And I think both is better than either alone. She thought about that. Yes, she said. I'd be willing. She had not told anyone in town about the account work, but the way things traveled in Red Valley, it arrived before she could have carried it anyway. She heard it secondhand from the woman who ran the boarding house, who had heard it from someone whose husband worked for a man who supplied Carter's ranch. The story that was circulating, already larger and more dramatic than the actual facts, was that Eleanor Hayes had exposed a thief in William Carter's operation and been given authority over his financial records as a result. The actual facts were quieter than that, but Eleanor understood how stories worked. Stories needed an edge to travel. A woman sitting quietly and competently with a ledger didn't move through a town the way a woman who had exposed wrongdoing did. She let it travel. She didn't correct it. Because the underlying fact that William Carter had trusted her with something real was true regardless of the shape the story had taken. What she did not expect was the man who was waiting for her when she returned from the ranch on a Thursday evening. He was standing outside the general store, and she recognized him as she came around the corner, the 5th man. The one with the kind eyes who had heard about the farm and the debts and asked about family and then turned away. His name was Robert Aldous. She knew that because she had asked Mrs. Greer after the fact, the way you want to put a name to something that has hurt you even when the name doesn't help. He was watching her approach with an expression that was not quite comfortable. Miss Hayes. Mr. Aldous, she said evenly. I heard about Carter. Did you? I wanted to. He stopped, rearranged himself. I wanted to say that I thought you deserved better than how things went. Between us, I mean. In terms of the platform introduction. Eleanor stopped walking. She looked at Robert Aldous with the full, clear attention she gave everything. What did I deserve? She said. I just meant I may have been hasty. I heard about your situation and You heard about difficulty, Eleanor said. And you assumed difficulty was contagious. He blinked. You thought that a woman who had survived hard things would bring hard things with her, she continued. And you didn't want hard things. You wanted easy. Which is fine, Mr. Aldous, that's a human preference. But don't apologize to me now because William Carter has 42,000 acres. That's not an apology. That's just arithmetic. Robert Aldous stood very still. Good evening, Eleanor said. She walked past him. Her hands, she noticed, were perfectly steady. Chapua. The courtship continued through September and into October, and Red Valley shifted around Eleanor the way weather shifts gradually, and then all at once. The woman at the boarding house started saving her the best seat in the parlor. The storekeeper's wife started reporting things she had heard about Carter's operation, as though they were valuable pieces of news she was privileged to share. The minister's wife, who had given Eleanor a certain coolly sympathetic treatment for months, that was worse in some ways than open dismissal, began stopping to talk to her on the street about things that were not Eleanor's marriage prospects. None of this was warmth exactly. It was calibration. Red Valley was reassessing Eleanor Hayes the way it always assessed people through what they meant to someone who mattered. On her own, she had been nothing. Connected to William Carter, she became legible. She understood this clearly. She did not pretend it was something else, but she also noticed something different happening. The ranch workers had started it. On her third Monday visit, a man named Thomas, who managed the eastern cattle, had waited for a natural pause in a conversation she was having with William, and then, with the careful deliberateness of someone who didn't do things carelessly, had addressed her directly. He'd had a question about a water channel, something practical and detailed, and he had asked her as though it were the most natural thing in the world to direct the question at her instead of at the man standing next to her. William had been quiet. Eleanor had answered. The answer had been accurate. By the fifth visit, Tomas had started including her in conversations as a matter of course. By the sixth, two other workers had begun doing the same thing. Not because she was William Carter's intended, or not only because of that, because she had been here and paid attention and known things, and people who do real work respect the knowing of things above almost everything else. On the seventh visit, William's head foreman cornered her by the barn. His name was Doug Pritchard. He had been with Carter's ranch for 16 years, which meant he had been there before, during, and after the first marriage, and he had not yet spoken more than 5 words to Eleanor directly. "You the one that found the ledger problem?" he said, not a question. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Saved Carter about $200 when you add it all up properly," he said. "That sounds about right." He looked at her with the flat, direct assessment of someone who does not use flattery as a mode of exchange. "He's had 3 women before you try to get close to him," Doug Pritchard said. "One was after the money, one was after the name, one was after—" He paused. "Something more complicated. None of them knew what a ledger was." "I grew up keeping my family's books," Eleanor said. He said that. Another pause. "He also said you asked him whether he was offering you the account work out of trust or convenience." "I did." "And he said both." "He did." Doug Pritchard nodded once with the satisfaction of a man who has confirmed something important. "He's not wrong about many things," he said. "He's not wrong about you either." He walked back to his work. Toaz. Eleanor stood for a moment with the October sun on her face, and the sound of the ranch around her, the particular layered sound of a large working operation, and felt something shift in her chest. Not the careful waiting feeling she had lived with for 8 months. Something that felt for the first time in a very long time, like the beginning of belonging. But belonging had to survive what came next. She found out on a Tuesday, not from William, not from Mrs. Greer, but from a woman she barely knew named Pearl Hutchins, who ran a hat shop on the main street, and had always treated Eleanor with the specific friendliness of someone who was keeping all options open. Pearl Hutchins leaned across her counter and said with the barely contained excitement of someone delivering a grenade they've been holding all morning, "Did you hear about Margaret Hollowell?" Eleanor hadn't. "Thomas Hollowell's daughter," Pearl said. "She arrived in Red Valley 3 days ago, from St. Louis. Her father and William Carter's father were business partners before they both passed, so the families go back. And Thomas Hollowell's estate as well." Pearl's voice dropped into the register it reached when she wanted to make something sound momentous. "They say she's come specifically to meet William Carter." Eleanor kept her expression exactly where it was. "And she's staying." Pearl continued watching Eleanor's face with the focused attention of someone who wants to see an explosion at the Hollowell cousins' house, which is 3 doors down from Carter's attorney's office. Another pause. "Which is where Carter meets with his financial people every other week." 3 doors down. On purpose. Eleanor thanked Pearl Hutchins, bought a length of ribbon she didn't need, walked out. She stood on the main street of Red Valley in the October light. Margaret Hollowell, old family connection, St. Louis money, deliberately positioned within natural meeting distance of William Carter's professional life. Eleanor had been rejected 8 times on a wooden platform for not being young enough, soft enough, connected enough. Margaret Hollowell arrived from St. Louis with exactly the kind of history and connections that Eleanor had never had and never would have. She looked down at the length of ribbon in her hand. She could leave. She knew that. She could go back to the rented room, pack the leather suitcase, and go somewhere else and start something else, and tell herself this had been a reasonable thing to attempt and an unreasonable thing to have hoped for. She had survived leaving things before. She could survive this. But she stood on the street in the October light and asked herself the same question she had been asking herself for 8 months on a wooden platform. Would giving up hurt more than trying again? Yes. Yes, it still would. Eleanor Hayes put the ribbon in her pocket and walked toward the Carter Ranch. She didn't ride out to the ranch that afternoon to confront William Carter about Margaret Hollowell. She rode out because she had a meeting scheduled about the November supply order, and Eleanor Hayes had never in her life canceled something important because something difficult was also happening. That was not a discipline she had cultivated intentionally. It was simply what survival looked like when you had been practicing it long enough. The wagon ride took 40 minutes. She spent those 40 minutes thinking clearly the way she had learned to think when emotion wanted to take the wheel, not suppressing it, not pretending it wasn't there, but letting it run alongside rather than in front. The facts were, a woman with old family ties to William Carter had come to Red Valley. She had positioned herself near his professional life deliberately. Eleanor did not know whether William knew. She did not know whether he cared. She did not know whether Margaret Hollowell was a serious consideration, or a social courtesy call, or something in between. What she knew was that she was going to finish the supply ledger meeting. And then she was going to ask him directly, because the one thing Eleanor Hayes had learned from 8 months of standing on a platform and watching men look past her was that waiting for information that you could simply request was the most expensive kind of patience. Doug Pritchard met her at the gate the way he had started doing in the past 2 weeks, not as a formal gesture, she understood, but because the gate was near the stable, and the stable was where he spent his mornings, and acknowledging her arrival had become a natural part of the morning's routine, in the same quiet way that many things at Carter's ranch had started shifting around her presence. "He's in the office," Doug said. "Had a visitor this morning." Eleanor looked at him. Doug's expression gave her nothing, which from Doug Pritchard was itself a kind of information. "Thank you," she said. She found William at his desk with the supply ledger already open, which meant he had been expecting her, and had prepared for it, which was one of the things she had come to notice about him. He prepared. He was not a man who showed up to things empty-handed and hoped for the best. He thought before he arrived the same way he spoke before he committed to a position, and the consistency of it had become over these weeks something she relied on without having decided to. He looked up when she came in. "You heard?" he said. Not a question. Eleanor sat down across from him and set the ledger notes she'd brought on the desk between them. "Pearl Hutchins," she said. He leaned back in his chair. "I was going to tell you today." "I know." "How do you know?" "Because you're someone who tells people things," Eleanor said. "You don't make a habit of letting people find out sideways. It's one of the things I've noticed about you." Something in his face, not quite a smile, but the neighborhood of one. "Margaret Hollowell came to the ranch this morning," he said. "Her cousin brought her. She wanted to pay her respects regarding her father and mine. And we spoke for 40 minutes about 2 men who are both dead and a business arrangement that ended when they died." He paused. "She's a perfectly agreeable woman. She's also here because her cousin told her I was unmarried, and she is 26 years old, and her family is hoping to re-establish a connection that has real financial benefit for them." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Did she say that directly?" "No," William said. "She was far too polished for that. But I've been in enough rooms with people who want things to recognize the shape of it." "And what do you want?" Eleanor said. He looked at her steadily. "I want to finish the supply ledger meeting," he said. "And then I want to tell you something I probably should have said 3 weeks ago." The supply ledger meeting lasted an hour and a half. Eleanor had found another discrepancy, smaller than the first but meaningful when you added it to a pattern. Someone had been rounding numbers in a direction that consistently favored a single supplier. Not dramatically, not in a way that would catch immediate attention, but consistently over 18 months, in a way that added up. William listened to her walk through it with the same quality of attention he gave everything complete no part of him somewhere else. When she finished, he was quiet. "That's Thompson," he said. The account clerk you had in the spring. He left in June, said he had family in Colorado. William looked at the numbers she had laid out. He was stealing from me for a year and a half, and I didn't see it. You weren't looking for it, Eleanor said. People rarely look for what they trust won't be there. I should have looked. Yes, she agreed, not softening it, not making it easier. He didn't need easier, he needed accurate. He was quiet again. Then, how much in total? Best estimate about $340, possibly closer to $400 if there are records I haven't accessed yet. William stood up. He walked to the window. She'd seen him do this before, a physical displacement he used when he was processing something that required more than his stationary self. Then he turned back. I want you to have full access to every financial record in this operation, he said. From the beginning, as far back as the books go. Eleanor looked at him. William, I know what I'm asking. I'm not sure you do, she said carefully. Full access to your financial history is not a small thing. That goes far past account management. That's the kind of access you give a partner. He came back to the desk, sat down, looked at her with those precise, honest eyes. Yes, he said. It is. The word landed in the room like something solid. Eleanor held his gaze. You said you were going to tell me something 3 weeks ago. I was, he said. I didn't because I was trying to be patient and let the courtship move at a pace that was fair to you. I didn't want to put pressure on something that should develop naturally. A pause. But I think I've been confusing patience with evasion. What's the difference? Patience is giving something time because it needs time, William said. Evasion is giving something time because you're afraid of what the other person will say. Eleanor felt the steadiness in her chest that she associated with important moments. Not calm exactly, but focused. And which one were you doing? The second one, he said without hesitation. I was afraid you'd say it was too soon. She breathed. What were you going to tell me? She said. William Carter looked at Eleanor Hayes across the desk with the supply ledger and the evidence of the theft she'd uncovered and the notes in her handwriting between them, and he said, I'm not interested in Margaret Hollowell. I'm not interested in anyone else. I made my decision on that platform, and I've had 6 weeks to understand it better, and I understand it well enough now to say clearly that I would like you to stop renting a room above the general store and become my wife. Silence. Not the crowd's silence, not the platform silence. Something private and enormous. That's not a question, Eleanor said. No, he admitted. I could rephrase it. Don't, she said. He waited. I need to think about this, Eleanor said. Not because I don't know what I want. I know what I want. I need to think about whether what I want is what's actually in front of me, or whether I'm letting what I want change how I see what's in front of me. There's a difference. I know the difference, he said. Give me until Friday, she said. He nodded once. She gathered her notes and left. She didn't sleep Tuesday night. Not because she was torn. She wasn't torn, or if she was, the tearing was not between yes and no, but between yes and the fear that yes would turn into something she hadn't calculated. She had built her survival on accurate calculations. She had learned the hard way that wanting something badly enough to miscalculate it was one of the most expensive errors a person could make. So she stayed awake, and she did what she always did when she needed to think clearly. She made a list. Not of feelings. Feelings were real, but they were not the kind of information she was looking for tonight. She listed facts. William Carter's character as she had observed it over 6 weeks of sustained daily proximity. Not his reputation. Not his money. His character. He told the truth when it was inconvenient. She had seen this 3 times, once with the ledger discrepancy once. When he had disagreed with a supplier in a meeting she sat in on and said so without softening it once, when he had told Doug Pritchard that a decision Doug had made about the eastern pasture had been wrong. And why in front of 2 other workers without raising his voice or making it cruel but without pretending the error away either. He changed his mind when presented with better information. She had seen this twice, and it was rarer than people thought. Most men, Most people changed what they admitted to thinking without actually changing what they thought. William revised his actual position, and when he did, he said so plainly. He had not once in 6 weeks made her feel that her observations were welcome, only because they confirmed something he already believed. He had not once made her feel like a decoration. She looked at her list at 2 a.m. and thought, I am already trusting this man. I am already planning with him. I have already let him mean something to me. The question is not whether to begin. The question is whether I'm willing to acknowledge that I've already begun. She put the list away. She still didn't sleep. Wednesday morning, she was at the general store buying flour when Margaret Hollowell walked in. Eleanor knew immediately who she was. Not because she'd seen her before she hadn't, but because Margaret Hollowell had the particular quality of a woman who has spent her entire life being exactly what people expected, and that quality sits on a person like a well-fitted garment. She was beautiful in the polished way that came from never having had to choose between buying food and buying soap. She was dressed in the kind of fabric that said St. Louis in every thread. She saw Eleanor at the same moment Eleanor saw her. There was a half-second of assessment between them, the kind that women do faster and more accurately than anyone gives them credit for. Eleanor read her. She suspected Margaret Hollowell read her back. "Miss Hayes," said the storekeeper's wife, who had been watching this with barely disguised hunger. "This is Miss Hollowell. I know who she is," Eleanor said pleasantly. Margaret Hollowell looked at Eleanor with a directness that Eleanor respected immediately. "And I know who you are," she said. "You're the woman William Carter is courting." "I am." A pause. "He mentioned you." Something in Eleanor's chest did a thing she refused to examine in public. "Did he?" "Yesterday," Margaret Hollowell said, "when I visited. I asked him." She stopped, considered. Then, with the decisiveness of someone who has calculated that honesty is more efficient than strategy, "I asked him whether there was anyone he was currently involved with. He said yes immediately. He said your name before I finished the sentence." Eleanor was quiet. "I want you to know," Margaret continued, "that I came to Red Valley at my cousin's suggestion and my family's encouragement, and I had no intention of inserting myself into something already in progress. I came to pay respects for my father. Nothing else will come of it." A beat. "He's clearly made his decision." "I haven't given him an answer yet," Eleanor said. Margaret Hollowell looked at her with something that was too clear-eyed to be pity and too knowing to be mere curiosity. "Are you going to—" "Friday," Eleanor said. Margaret Hollowell nodded once with the small formality of a woman who keeps her composure as a matter of course. She bought what she came for. She left. The storekeeper's wife turned to Eleanor with an expression like Christmas morning. "Well," she breathed. "I need 2 pounds of flour," Eleanor said. Thursday was quiet. Eleanor spent it at the ranch, not because of the courtship, but because she had work there, and the work was real, regardless of everything else happening around it. She went through September's supply records with the methodical patience she applied to everything cross-referencing against the corrected October figures, building a clearer picture of where Thompson's manipulation had begun. Doug Pritchard found her in the office at midday. He set a cup of coffee on the desk, without asking whether she wanted it, which she had learned was his version of welcome, and he stood in the doorway. "You're still here," he said. "I have work," she said. "Carter's in the north pasture. Won't be back until late afternoon." "I know," Eleanor said. "I'm not here for Carter. I'm here for the ledgers." Doug was quiet for a moment with the quality of quiet he used when he was approaching something sideways. "He told me," he said finally, "what he asked you." Eleanor looked up. "He didn't tell me what you said," Doug added. "Just that you asked for, until Friday." A pause. He looked about the same as a man looks when he's submitted a bid and is waiting to hear. "That's a very practical way to describe it," Eleanor said. "I'm a practical man." Doug came into the office and sat down in the chair across from her. The first time he had ever done that, she realized, ever sat down in her presence rather than standing in doorways. It meant something. She wasn't sure exactly what, but it meant something. "Can I say something that is none of my business?" "You've never let that stop you before," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "No, I haven't." He put his hands on his knees and looked at her directly. "I've worked for William Carter for 16 years. I worked for him when his first wife was alive. I worked for him when she died. I watched him run this ranch for 4 years by himself, and I watched him run it well. He's one of the best men I know when it comes to managing land and cattle and people." He stopped. "But I also watched what it did to him. 4 years of coming home to a house with no one in it. 4 years of making every decision alone. He'd never say it. He's not a man who says that kind of thing." Eleanor set down her pen. "He came to that platform," Doug said, "because I told him he had to. Not in those words. I told him that the ranch was fine. The business was fine. But that a man needs more than a fine business. He argued with me for 3 weeks." Doug looked at her steadily. "And then he went. And he came back and told me about you. And he said—" Doug stopped again, started again. "He said that you told him giving up would hurt more than trying again. And he said that was the most honest answer he'd heard in a long time," Eleanor said quietly. "He told you that?" "He did." "Then you know," Doug said. He stood up. He picked up his hat from where he'd left it on the edge of the desk. "That's all. That was the thing I needed to say." He went to the door, stopped. "The coffee's hot for about another 20 minutes. He left. Eleanor sat for a long moment with her hands flat on the ledger and the sound of the ranch around her. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. Friday morning came clean and cold, the way October mornings did in this part of the territory when the season had finally committed to itself. Eleanor walked to the ranch rather than waiting for the wagon. It was 4 miles. She had walked longer distances for less reason. William was at the gate when she arrived, which meant someone had seen her coming and told him, or he had been watching for her, and either way he had come to meet her instead of waiting at the house. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, which struck her as the most William Carter gesture she could have imagined, practical, prepared, not showy. He handed her one without speaking. She took it. They stood at the gate in the cold morning air and drank their coffee. "I have an answer," Eleanor said. "I figured," he said. "I'm going to say yes," she said. "But I need to say something first, and I need you to hear it fully before you respond." "All right." She looked at him. "I have been overlooked and discarded my entire adult life. By circumstances, by men, by a town that decided what I was worth before it knew what I could do. I have made my peace with most of that. I don't carry bitterness. I made a deliberate decision not to, because bitterness is a weight and I travel light." She held the coffee cup in both hands. "But I need you to understand that I am not coming into your life to disappear into it. I am not coming to be useful in the background. I am coming as myself, all of it. The accounting skills, and the opinions, and the uncomfortable observations, and the parts of me that are not soft or young or easy. If that changes at some point, if you decide you want the other kind of wife, I need to know now, before I stop renting the room." William Carter listened to all of it. When she finished, he didn't rush to respond. He drank his coffee. "I'm 42 years old," he said. "I built this ranch by making good decisions. The best decision I ever made in my personal life I made on a platform in front of half of Red Valley." He looked at her. "I don't regret decisions I've made clearly, and I make every decision clearly." "That's not quite an answer," Eleanor said. "No," he agreed. "Here's the answer I want you as yourself. Not a managed version, not a quieter version. I spent 16 years managing this ranch, and the one thing I have learned is that the people who tell you what you don't want to hear are the people who make the operation work. The ones who smooth everything over and agree with everything are the ones who let a Thompson steal from you for 18 months. He looked at her steadily. "I need someone who will tell me when I'm wrong. I need someone who will say the thing. I have never in my life needed someone to be decorative." Eleanor breathed out. "All right," she said. "Is that a yes?" I said I was going to say yes. You also said but. The but was the condition, she said. The condition has been met. He put out his hand the way he put out his hand when he completed a business arrangement he intended to honor, not with ceremony, not with sentimentality, with the solid straightforwardness of a man who treated his word as binding. She shook it. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He covered her hand with both of his and held it for a moment, not in the formal way, but in the way of someone who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has finally been told they can put it down. Thank you, he said. For what? She said. For coming back, he said. The 8th time. Babe. She moved out of the rented room above the general store on a Saturday, which was not the most dignified process because the storekeeper's wife had apparently told 3 people, and those 3 had told 7. And by the time Eleanor carried her first box down the stairs, there was a small audience on the street. She had 1 leather suitcase. She had a box of books. She had a crate with the household tools and account materials she'd accumulated over the months, and she had the deliberate awareness that everything she owned fit in the back of a single wagon, and she was unbothered by this because what she owned had never been the point. William's wagon was waiting. He was not. He had sent it with a driver, which she appreciated because arriving at the ranch she was about to move into for the first time did not need to be a public spectacle with the ranch's owner standing in the street. He understood that. He understood a great deal she was learning without being told. The driver was a young man named Henry, who was 18 and had the particular awkward courtesy of someone who had been given very specific instructions about how to behave and was executing them with effort. Mr. Carter said to tell you the east bedroom has been cleared, Henry said carefully as he loaded her crate. And the key is on the desk in the office, and there's coffee on if you want it when you arrive. Eleanor smiled. Henry looked relieved. She had been at the wagon for approximately 6 minutes when she heard her name from across the street. She turned. A woman she recognized, Frances Blythe, whose husband owned the feed store, who had been one of the whisperers, one of the women who had deployed the particular cruelty of very audible sympathy in Eleanor's presence over the months, was standing on the opposite side of the street. Frances Blythe looked at Eleanor and the wagon, and Eleanor's single leather suitcase, and then she crossed the street. Eleanor, she said. Frances. I wanted to say. Frances stopped. She was a woman who had probably not said a sincerely difficult thing in years, and the effort of approaching one was visible. I wasn't kind to you. Over the past year, I said things that I wouldn't want said about me. Eleanor waited. I'm sorry for that, Frances said. It came out plainly without decoration, and Eleanor credited her for it. I know, Eleanor said. Thank you. I hope, Frances looked at the wagon again. I hope you're happy there. I intend to be, Eleanor said. Henry finished loading the crate. Eleanor climbed onto the wagon seat. She did not look back at the rented room above the general store as they pulled away. She had looked back at things often enough in her life. She had decided somewhere in the arithmetic of the week that she was done with that particular direction. The ranch at Carter's property was not what she had expected, and she had expected something considerable. What she hadn't expected was the quiet, not silence. The ranch was full of sound, the livestock and the workers and the machinery of a large operation. But beneath all of it was a quality of stillness that she had not encountered in years. Perhaps since she was young enough that the farm still felt like a whole world, rather than a responsibility she was carrying alone. The kind of stillness that comes from being somewhere big enough that you don't have to shrink yourself to fit in it. She stood in the entrance of the main house with her suitcase and her box of books, and she breathed it in. William came out of the office when he heard the wagon. He looked at her in the doorway. Well, he said. Well, she said. I had Mrs. Pruitt put fresh linens in the east room. Thank you. The ledgers for 1883 are in the back cabinet. I pulled them out in case you wanted to keep going back with the Thompson situation. I do, she said. He nodded. Coffee's still hot. She walked into the house that was about to become hers. William moved to take her crate, and she let him, and they navigated the hallway together in the easy silence of 2 people who have already established through weeks of side-by-side work that they do not need to fill every space between them with talk. She put her suitcase in the east room. She set her books on the shelf. She went to the office and poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one back to William, who was at his desk reviewing the morning's reports from the north pasture, and she set it beside him without saying anything and sat down in the chair across from him that had started to feel in the past weeks like her chair. He looked up. "You brought me coffee," he said. "You've brought me coffee approximately 14 times, she said. "I've been keeping a ledger." He looked at her for a moment. Then William Carter, the richest man in 3 counties, who had managed 42,000 acres and 63 employees and more difficult situations than most people encountered in a lifetime, laughed out loud. Not politely. Not with restraint. With the full, unmanaged sound of a man who has been surprised into genuine laughter by someone he didn't expect to surprise him. Eleanor picked up her coffee cup and opened the 1883 ledger. She was home. Cindy. She had been at the ranch for 9 days when the first real test arrived. Not the Margaret Hollowell kind of test, the social maneuvering kind, the kind that happened in hat shops and on main streets. This was a different category. It came in the form of a man named Garrett Cole. Garrett Cole was a land attorney from the county seat, and he arrived on a Tuesday morning without sending word ahead, which Eleanor had already learned was his habitual way of operating. William had mentioned him once briefly in a context that had not invited elaboration. She had noted the way he said the name, the particular quality of flatness he used for things he didn't like but had to deal with. She was in the office working on the corrected accounts when Cole came in. He didn't knock. He stopped when he saw her. Eleanor looked up. Garrett Cole was a man who had clearly spent a long time being the most important person in any room he entered. He was perhaps 50, with the sleek presentation of someone who had learned long ago that looking well organized made people trust you with their business. He looked at Eleanor with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite dismissal, somewhere between the two, which was the specific expression of a man reassessing whether someone is relevant. "I'm looking for Carter," he said. "He's with the cattle manager," Eleanor said. "He'll be back in about an hour. You're welcome to wait." "And you are?" "Eleanor Hayes," she said. Williams intended. Cole's expression moved through several small calculations she could see clearly. "Ah," he said. "The mail-order bride." Eleanor set down her pen. "I didn't come through a mail-order arrangement," she said evenly. "I was introduced through the Red Valley Bride Introduction Platform, which is a distinct process. But I don't imagine the distinction matters much to you." Cole looked at her steadily. "What are you doing with his ledgers?" "Account management," she said. "You're managing Carter's accounts." "I am." "Since when?" "Since I found a theft pattern that his previous account keeper missed," she said. "I imagine William will explain the details when he's back. Can I get you coffee while you wait?" Cole sat down. He was looking at her differently now, not warmly, not respectfully, but with a reassessment that was more focused than the first scan had been. "You found a theft," he said. "Thompson," she said. "Approximately $400 over 18 months. And you're the one who found it." "Yes." Silence. "How much accounting experience do you have?" he said, and it was the kind of question that sounded like curiosity, but had teeth underneath it. "I managed my family's farm accounts from age 16, she said, "including 2 debt restructurings and a legal dispute over water rights. I have 11 years of practical experience, and I can read a column of figures faster than anyone you're likely to hire through formal channels." Cole looked at the ledger open in front of her. "Carter knows you have full access," he said. "He gave it to me," Eleanor said. Something shifted in Garrett Cole's face. "Well," he said. He didn't say anything else. William came back 40 minutes later, and the conversation between him and Cole happened in the office with Eleanor present, which William arranged simply by not asking her to leave, and she recognized this for what it was. Not a statement, not a performance, just the ordinary extension of the assumption he had been making for weeks that she was part of this. The meeting concerned a land boundary dispute on the southern parcel. Something complex and long-running, and Cole was clearly expecting to manage it at a level of detail that he was accustomed to managing without the property owner fully following. William followed every word. Eleanor followed every word. At one point, Cole referenced a number that didn't match what Eleanor had seen in the property records, and she said so quietly, and Cole stopped mid-sentence and looked at her, and then at the figure in his own documents, and said after a pause, "You're right. I was looking at the wrong parcel." William looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at William. Nothing was said. But something was confirmed between them that had already been building for weeks. After Cole left, William stood in the doorway of the office. "He'll adjust," he said. "He already has," Eleanor said. "The second adjustment is always faster than the first." William looked at her. "How did you know there'd be a second?" "Because the first one was genuine," she said. "He's not a fool. He just had to recalibrate. Fools don't recalibrate." William thought about that. "I need to tell you something about Cole," he said. "Something I should have told you before he came." Eleanor felt the temperature of the room shift in the way it shifted when something that had been at a distance was about to become close. "Tell me," she said. He sat down. "Garrett Cole has been managing my legal affairs for 9 years, William said. "He's done it well mostly, but there's a piece of the southern property about 600 acres that he's been involved in a separate negotiation with, without my knowledge. I found out 3 weeks ago." He paused. "He's been in quiet conversation with a land company out of Denver that wants the water access on that parcel." Eleanor was still. "He's been negotiating to sell something that isn't his to sell," she said. "Without my authorization." "Yes." "And you haven't confronted him yet?" "I've been building the documentation," William said. "I need it complete before I move. If I move too soon and he covers his trail, I lose the parcel and the legal ground both." Eleanor looked at the ledgers in front of her. Then she looked at William Carter. "I want to help with the documentation," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "That's not a small thing I'm asking you to step into," he said. "I know," she said. "I've never been interested in small things." The silence between them had weight and clarity the way the best silences did. "All right," he said. She pulled the property record file toward her and opened it to the southern parcel. Outside the ranch kept its sounds, the cattle and the workers, and the particular rhythms of a place that was alive with purpose. Inside the office, Eleanor Hayes began building the case that was going to protect everything William Carter had spent his life creating. She did not yet know that Garrett Cole had been watching her far more carefully than she realized. She did not yet know what he was willing to do to stop her. Eleanor found the second set of books on a Wednesday, not because she was looking for them specifically. She was cross-referencing the southern parcel property records against Cole's billing statements, the methodical patient work of building a documentation trail that would hold up under legal scrutiny, when she noticed something that should not have been there. A reference number in Cole's October invoice that corresponded to no file in William's record system. Not a missing file. Not a misfiled document. A reference number that pointed to something that had never been entered into William's records at all. She sat with that for a moment. Then she pulled Cole's last 18 months of invoices and went through every reference number one by one. There were 11 that didn't correspond to anything in William's files. 11 separate billing entries for legal work that William Carter had apparently paid for without knowing what he was paying for. She found William in the north barn. She didn't wait for a natural break in what he was doing. She walked up to him directly, which she had learned was the only appropriate speed for information of this weight, and she said, "I need 10 minutes. Now." He looked at her face. He told the man he was speaking with they would continue later and followed her without asking why. She laid it out in the office, the invoices and the reference numbers and the gap in the records, and she watched William's face move through the particular sequence of a man processing something that makes previously confusing things suddenly clear. "He's been billing me for work on the Denver negotiation," William said. "It wasn't a question. That's what it looks like," Eleanor said. He's been using your money to fund the legal preparation for a land deal he's conducting against your interests. You've been paying for the documentation that's going to be used to take your property." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man controlling something large. "How solid is this?" William said finally. "Solid enough to take to a judge," Eleanor said. "Not yet solid enough to guarantee the outcome. I need the Denver correspondence. If Cole has been communicating with the land company in writing, and he has to have been deals like this, don't happen on a handshake at this scale, then those letters are the difference between a strong case and an airtight one." "He won't have kept them here," William said. "No," Eleanor said. "They'll be at his office in the county seat, or with the Denver company directly." William stood up. "I need to make a trip." "Not yet," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "If you go to the county seat now, Cole will know within a day that you're moving against him. He has people there. He's been operating in that county for 20 years. He knows everyone who knows everyone." She kept her voice level. "He'll move the documents, or destroy them, or accelerate the Denver timeline before you have grounds to stop it." William was quiet. "Then what do we do?" he said. "We keep working as though nothing has changed," Eleanor said. "We complete the documentation on our end, and then we move everything at once." He looked at her steadily. "You've done this before." "I negotiated 2 debt restructurings on a farm that 3 separate creditors were trying to take from us simultaneously," she said. "The principle is the same. You don't let the other side know you're ready until you're completely ready. Then you don't give them time to breathe." William sat back down. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need." What she needed was time, and time was the one thing that felt uncertain. She had been at the ranch for 2 weeks. The wedding date had been set not formally, not publicly announced, but agreed between them, a simple ceremony at the end of November in front of the minister, and whatever witnesses felt natural. No grand event. Neither of them wanted a grand event. They wanted a fact. But between now and the end of November, the Cole situation had to resolve. She built the documentation with the same systematic attention she had given everything since she was 16 years old, and keeping the farm's books in the kitchen while her brother slept. And the creditor's letters sat unopened on the table because she needed to understand the numbers before she could respond to the letters. She cross-referenced. She verified. She built the narrative that the numbers told into something a judge could read in sequence and follow without confusion. Doug Pritchard found her in the office at 11 o'clock one night. He stood in the doorway with a lamp and the expression of a man who has been awake for the same hours she has and is not surprised to find her still at the desk. "You need to eat something," he said. "I had dinner." 6 hours ago." Eleanor looked up. She hadn't realized it was that late. "There's bread in the kitchen," Doug said. "And I made coffee an hour ago. It's still decent." She pushed back from the desk. "Thank you." He didn't leave. He leaned in the doorway while she stretched out the hours from her back and neck, and his expression held the particular quality she had come to recognize as his version of concern, flat-faced and gruff, and completely genuine. "Cole came by today," he said. Eleanor went still. "While you were in town," Doug continued, "William was with him for about an hour. Cole asked about you." "What did he ask?" "Asked how far you were into the account work. Asked whether you'd been pulling old files." Doug's voice was even, but his eyes were not. "William told him you were finishing up the Thompson situation and moving into current supply management." Eleanor breathed carefully. Cole believed him. "Hard to say with Cole," Doug said. "But he was here for an hour, and he spent most of it talking about other things, which is Cole's way of finding out what he wants to know without asking directly." "He's worried," Eleanor said. "He should be," Doug said. She looked at him. "You know about the Denver situation?" "William told me last week," Doug said. "After you found the invoices." He was quiet for a moment. "I've known something was wrong with Cole for 2 years. Couldn't put a shape to it. You put a shape to it in 9 days." "I had the ledgers," Eleanor said. "Other people had the ledgers," Doug said. "They weren't looking the way you look." She didn't know quite what to do with that, so she said nothing, which was becoming her preferred response to things she didn't know what to do with. Cole is not a man who accepts being outmaneuvered quietly, Doug said. I want you to know that. Whatever you're building, build it fast. He left the lamp on the edge of the desk. Eleanor went back to work. The first attack came not on the documentation. It came on her. She had not anticipated this, which she later considered a miscalculation. She had been thinking about Cole in terms of legal strategy, in terms of documents and correspondence, and the logical steps of a man protecting a business interest. She had not adequately accounted for the fact that destroying a business case and destroying a person's credibility were two different strategies, and a man who was good at one was often very good at the other. She found out on Thursday morning in town when she went to pick up the weekly supply order. 3 things happened in the space of an hour that told the same story. The first was at the feed store, where the clerk who had always been straightforward with her was suddenly overlong in his hesitation about an order she had placed the previous week. A simple order. An order she had placed a dozen times. He kept reviewing it, kept finding reasons to check things that didn't need checking, and when she asked him directly what the problem was, he said, "No problem, Miss Hayes," in the particular tone of a man who has a problem and has been told not to share it. The second was outside the minister's office, where she passed 2 women she recognized from the boarding house circle, women who had moved from ignoring her to acknowledging her in the weeks since William's courtship had become known. They acknowledged her now, but differently, with the particular careful brightness of women who have heard something and are trying to decide how to factor it in. The third was direct. A man she didn't recognize was waiting outside the general store when she came out with her packages. He fell into step beside her in the practiced way of someone who has done this before. "Miss Hayes," he said. She kept walking. "I don't believe we've met." "Name's Ferris," he said. "I work for a firm out of Denver, land acquisition." She stopped walking. She turned to face him fully, which she did deliberately, because she had learned that the worst thing you could do when someone wanted to unsettle you was let them manage the geometry of the conversation. "What do you want?" she said. Ferris was perhaps 45, with the unremarkable face of someone who had spent years being professionally unmemorable. "Just a conversation," he said, "about your situation." "My situation is straightforward," she said. "Is it?" He said it pleasantly, which was worse than if he'd said it with an edge. "A woman with your history moving into a position of financial management at a major property, some people might have questions about that." Eleanor held his gaze. "What kind of questions?" "Questions about experience," he said. "Qualifications. Whether a woman who spent years on a failed farm is the right person to be making financial decisions about 42,000 acres of productive land." The word failed landed exactly where he intended it to land. She felt it. She didn't show him that she felt it. "My family's farm did not fail," she said. "It was restructured under difficult conditions and maintained solvency. That's a distinction that matters." She picked up her packages. "And my qualifications are William Carter's business, not yours. Good day, Mr. Ferris." She walked away. Her hands were completely steady. Her heartbeat was not. She told William that evening. She told him everything, starting with the feed store and ending with Ferris, and she watched his face move through the sequence of a man whose careful, patient strategy has just been disrupted by the other side moving faster than expected. "Cole sent him," William said. "Obviously. He's trying to establish a public narrative before we can move," William said. "If he can make Red Valley doubt your competence, he undercuts everything you've documented. A judge can be told that the financial evidence was assembled by a woman with a failed farm and no formal qualifications, and suddenly the documentation is questionable." "Yes," Eleanor said. "How far along are we?" "Close," Eleanor said. "I need 2 more days on the correspondence analysis, maybe 3. "We may not have 3, William said. "I know that." He was quiet, looking at the desk, the papers, the careful architecture of what she'd been building. Then he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not worry exactly, but something more specific. The expression of a man recognizing that someone else is carrying a weight they shouldn't have to carry alone. "I'm sorry," he said. Eleanor blinked. "For what?" "For bringing you into this without telling you the full scope of it," he said. "I knew about the Denver situation when I asked you to help. I knew Cole was capable of getting ugly. I should have told you clearly what you were stepping into." She looked at him for a long moment. "I stepped into it knowing it was complicated," she said. "You told me it wasn't a small thing. I said I knew." She paused. "Stop apologizing for things you told me the truth about." His expression shifted. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. "Now, tell me about Ferris. You know who he is." William leaned back. "He works for the Midland Land Company, based in Denver. He's done acquisition work across 3 territories. Not violent, he doesn't operate that way. He works through pressure and reputation. He wants to damage my reputation before I finish the documentation." "That's my read," William said. "Then we have to finish the documentation before he can do enough damage for it to matter," Eleanor said. "What do you know about the Midland Land Company's legal registration in this territory?" William looked at her. "Why?" "Because if they're operating in this county without proper territorial registration, any contract they've negotiated here is legally unenforceable," Eleanor said. "And Cole would know that. Which means either they are registered, or Cole has been conducting negotiations he knows are on shaky ground. Either way, I want to know." William was quiet. "I know a man at the Territorial Registrar's office," he said. "Can you reach him tomorrow?" "Yes." "Do it first thing," Eleanor said. She pulled the correspondence file back toward her. "I'll work through the night if I have to." William stood up. "I'll make coffee," he said. She worked through the night, not because it was heroic, because it was necessary, and Eleanor Hayes had never made a distinction between those two things when there was work to be done. She worked through the night the way she had worked through nights on the farm, with the lamp close, and the silence useful, and her mind clear in the particular way it got clear when the stakes were high enough to burn off everything that wasn't essential. By 3 in the morning, she had the shape of it. By 5, she had the documentation complete enough to take to a judge. The Midland Land Company's correspondence with Cole, which she had reconstructed from Cole's billing references. The property records and 2 letters she had found misfiled in a property survey folder that Cole had apparently used as temporary storage and forgotten, told a story that was both more straightforward and more damaging than she had expected. Cole had not just been negotiating without authorization. He had been negotiating under false authorization. There were 2 letters in the survey folder in which Cole had represented himself in writing to the Midland Land Company as having power of attorney over William Carter's southern parcel. He did not have power of attorney. He had never had power of attorney. He had invented it in writing and sent it to a Denver land company as the basis for a contract negotiation. That was not a civil matter. That was fraud. Eleanor sat with the 2 letters for a long time. Then she carried them to the kitchen, made coffee, and waited for the sun to come up. William found her at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning with the coffee and the 2 letters and the expression of someone who has been up all night and has arrived somewhere they didn't entirely expect to arrive. He sat down. She put the letters in front of him. He read them. She watched his face. It was the face of a man who has trusted someone for 9 years and is reading the specific, documented proof of what that trust was worth. He set the letters down. He was quiet for a long time. "Power of attorney," he said. "Fabricated," Eleanor said. "In writing, sent to Denver." "Yes." He looked at the letters once more. Then he looked at Eleanor. "This is criminal." "Yes," she said. "Which changes things." "How?" "Because a civil land dispute goes before a property judge, and Cole is very comfortable in front of property judges." Eleanor said. "A criminal fraud charge goes before a different court entirely with different procedures, and Cole's comfort level in that room is considerably lower. It also means the Midland Land Company is now potentially party to a fraud, which means their lawyers are going to want to distance themselves from Cole very quickly, which means their cooperation becomes available to us. William looked at her steadily. "You figured all of this out overnight," he said. "The documentation was already there," Eleanor said. "I just read it in the right order." He was quiet for another moment. "We need a different attorney," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Not from this county. Cole knows everyone in this county. We need someone from the territorial capital." "I know someone," William said. "James Whitmore. We've worked together before. He's honest, and he's good. Can you reach him today?" "I'll ride out myself," William said. Eleanor looked at him. "Cole may have someone watching the road." William's expression was calm. "Let him watch." He stood up. "Eleanor," he said. She looked up. "What you did last night?" He stopped. He was not a man who overstated things, and she had learned that the incomplete sentences were often the ones that carried the most weight with him. "I don't have the right words for it." "You don't need words for it," she said. "Go get Whitmore." The 4 days between William riding out for Whitmore and the confrontation with Cole were the most difficult Eleanor had experienced at the ranch. Not because of the workload. Work was the one thing that had always steadied her. Because of the waiting, which was its own kind of work, and one she had always been worse at. Cole came by on the second day. William was still at the territorial capital. Eleanor was in the office. Doug was somewhere on the property which she was aware of and found steadying. Cole knocked this time. A small adjustment, she noticed. He had assessed the landscape and adjusted. "Miss Hayes," he said, "I hope to catch William." "He's away," Eleanor said. "I expect him back in a few days." "Away where, if you don't mind my asking?" "Business," she said. "Is there something I can help you with?" Cole looked at her with those sleek, careful eyes, and she understood in that moment that he knew. Not the details, maybe, but he knew she had found something because he was a man who watched situations carefully, and the situation had changed in ways that pointed toward her. "I've been thinking," Cole said, coming into the office without being invited, which she noted that perhaps we got off on the wrong foot, you and I. "What foot would you prefer?" Eleanor said. "A clearer one," he said. He sat down across from her in the chair that she had come to think of as her chair, which she also noted. "You're a capable woman. Anyone can see that. William trusts your judgment." "He does. That kind of trust is worth protecting," Cole said. Eleanor kept her expression pleasant and empty. "I agree. There are situations." Cole continued with the measured pace of a man unspooling something carefully, where capable people discover things that seem significant, but are in fact more complicated than they appear. Things that have context a newcomer might not fully understand. "What kinds of things?" Eleanor said. "Property negotiations are rarely simple," Cole said. "There are often preliminary conversations that occur before formal authorization is established, exploratory discussions. Things that look on paper like they've gone further than they actually have." Eleanor looked at him. "Are you describing something specific?" she said. He held her gaze. "I'm describing the general nature of complex legal arrangements." "I see," she said. "Well, if you're concerned about how something might look on paper, the best approach is usually to make sure the paper tells an accurate story." The air between them changed. "Yes," Cole said after a pause. "That's one approach." "What's the other approach?" she said. His expression didn't move. "Sometimes the paper gets misread," he said, "by people who don't have the full picture." There it was. The offer wrapped in enough layers that it wasn't technically an offer in case she didn't take it. He was telling her she could decide she had misread what she'd found. He was telling her that decision was available to her. And underneath the telling was the implication not stated, not provable, but present the way smoke is present when there's fire nearby, that what happened if she chose the other reading would not be comfortable. Eleanor kept her face exactly where it was. "I'm quite careful with paper," she said. "I don't often misread things." Cole stood up. "Of course," he said pleasantly. "I'm sure you don't." He left. Eleanor waited until she heard his horse leave the property. Then she went to find Doug. "Why, he knows," she told Doug. "How much? That I've found something. Not necessarily what, but enough to be nervous." Doug's jaw tightened in the specific way it tightened when he was making a decision quickly. "Did he threaten you?" "Not in any way I could prove," Eleanor said. But, she confirmed. Doug looked toward the road. "William needs to come back faster." "William is getting Whitmore," Eleanor said. "That's the right move. We don't change the strategy because Cole is nervous." "Cole nervous is Cole dangerous," Doug said. "I know," Eleanor said, "but changing course now costs us more than holding does." Doug looked at her. "You don't rattle easily," he said. "I rattle," Eleanor said. "I'm just quiet about it." He almost smiled. "Fair enough." He paused. "I'll have 2 of the men stay close to the house. You won't see them being close, but they'll be close." Eleanor understood what he was offering, and she accepted it without making it into something larger than what it was. "Thank you, Doug." William came back on the 4th day with James Whitmore. Whitmore was younger than Eleanor expected, perhaps 35, lean and direct, with the particular quality of a man who had decided early that his time was valuable, and had organized everything else around that decision. He shook Eleanor's hand when they were introduced, looked at her clearly, and said, "William tells me you built the documentation. I'd like to see all of it." She put it in front of him. He spent 2 hours with it. She and William sat in the kitchen and drank coffee and didn't talk very much, which was its own kind of conversation. Whitmore came out of the office at the end of the 2 hours. He sat down at the kitchen table. "The 2 letters with the fabricated power of attorney," he said, "are enough for a criminal fraud charge. The billing records documenting that he used Carter's funds for the Denver negotiation add a separate count of misappropriation." He looked at Eleanor. "You cross-referenced the billing dates against the Denver correspondence dates." "Yes," Eleanor said. "The timeline is laid out on pages 7 through 11 of the summary document." "That's clean work," Whitmore said. "Not flattery. Assessment." "What's our exposure?" William said. "If we move quickly, very little," Whitmore said. "Cole's case depends on completing the Denver transaction before anyone discovers the fraud. If we file the criminal complaint before that transaction closes, the land company's lawyers pull out immediately, and the negotiation collapses on its own. Cole loses his legal standing in this county and probably in the territory." He paused. "If we're too slow and the transaction closes, it gets messier. Not impossible, but messier." "How fast can you file?" William said. "I can be at the territorial courthouse the day after tomorrow," Whitmore said. William looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Whitmore. "File," she said. Cole found out the morning Whitmore rode for the courthouse. She didn't know exactly how he found out, but she was not surprised that he did, because a man who had been operating in a county for 20 years had ears in places that couldn't be predicted or sealed. What surprised her was what he did with the information. She was in the office when the rider arrived, not Cole himself. Someone she didn't recognize, young and clearly uncomfortable with his errand, who handed her an envelope and left without speaking. William was with her. He opened it. Inside was a single page. It was a letter addressed to William from Garrett Cole. It said in the precise and measured language of a man who had spent decades making threatening things sound civil that he was aware of certain documents that had been removed from proper filing locations and were being misrepresented to territorial legal authorities. It said that he had his own documentation pertaining to the financial management of the Carter property accounts, and that he intended to present this documentation to the county judge to raise questions about the competence and authorization of persons recently given access to those accounts. It said that he was prepared to discuss a resolution that avoided unnecessary difficulties for all parties, and that he would call on William at the ranch the following morning. William read it. He handed it to Eleanor. She read it. The attack on the documentation, the attack on her competence, and the suggestion of a meeting which was Cole's way of buying 24 hours while he figured out how much damage he could do. "He's going to come here tomorrow morning and offer you money," Eleanor said. "Probably," William said. "And he's hoping you'll take it because it's cleaner than a criminal trial." "I know." She looked at him. "Will you?" William took the letter back from her and set it on the desk. "No," he said. "I won't." "Even if it gets difficult," she said. "Because it's going to get difficult, William. He's going to say things about me, about my history, about whether I had the authority to access and act on your records. He's going to use everything Ferris gathered and everything he can add to it." William looked at her steadily. "Let him say it," he said. "It will be ugly. I know what ugly looks like," he said. "I've been in business for 20 years. Ugly is not the same as wrong, and wrong is not something I negotiate with." Eleanor held his gaze. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. "Now, what do we do tonight that makes tomorrow's conversation irrelevant?" She picked up her pen. "We write our own letter," she said. "To the county judge, delivered tonight before Cole can schedule an appointment. We present the documentation and request an emergency hearing for the fraud complaint. If the judge grants it for tomorrow morning." "Cole walks into a trap instead of a negotiation," William said. "Yes." He pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him. "You write," he said. "You know the documentation better than I do." She wrote. He watched. Outside the ranch ran its sounds in the dark, the animals, the wind, the particular aliveness of a large property at night. Inside the office, Eleanor Hayes wrote the letter that would change everything in her clean, precise handwriting, with the lamp close, and the man she was going to marry sitting beside her, and she felt for the first time in the entire long, difficult stretch of this fight completely certain. Not certain of the outcome, certain of herself, and that she had learned over 29 years of surviving things that should have broken her, was the only certainty that had ever actually mattered. She finished the letter. William read it. He signed his name at the bottom. She folded it and sealed it. Doug Pritchard was at the door within 10 minutes, already in his coat, already knowing without being told that whatever was in that envelope needed to move through the dark before morning. He took it. He rode. Eleanor stood in the doorway of the main house and listened to the sound of hoofbeats going toward town, carrying everything they had built toward the judge, who would decide whether it was enough. Doug came back at 2 a.m. Eleanor heard the hoofbeats before she heard the knock, because she had not slept and had no intention of sleeping until she knew whether the letter had reached the judge. She was in the kitchen with cold coffee, and the lamp turned low when Doug came through the door, and she read his face before he said a word. His face said something had happened. "Judge Harlan was still in his office," Doug said. He pulled off his coat. "Working late. His clerk let me in." "And," William said. He had appeared in the hallway behind Eleanor, also not having slept. "He read it," Doug said. "Right there. All of it. Took him about 20 minutes. Doug sat down at the kitchen table with the heaviness of a man who has ridden hard and fast, and is not as young as he once was. He granted the hearing. Eleanor closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "When?" William said. "Tomorrow morning," Doug said. 9 o'clock. At the county courthouse." He paused. He also issued a hold on any property transactions involving the southern parcel pending the hearing outcome. The hold. That was the critical piece. Whatever Cole tried to accelerate overnight, whatever last-minute maneuvering he attempted with the Midland Land Company, the southern parcel was now legally frozen until a judge lifted it. Cole could not close the transaction. The trap had shut before he reached it. William looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him. "Get some sleep," she said. "You too," he said. Neither of them meant it, and both of them knew it, but they said it anyway, the way you say things that are more about intention than prediction. She slept for 3 hours. It was enough. She had run on less. She dressed carefully in the morning, which was a deliberate choice. Not her best dress. She didn't own a best dress in any meaningful sense. Nothing that qualified as formal by Red Valley's standards. But she wore the darkest, most structured thing she had, and she pinned her hair with more precision than usual, and she looked at herself in the small mirror in the east bedroom and made the same assessment she made every morning on that platform: steady. Whatever else happened, she would be steady. William was at the kitchen table when she came down, already dressed, already drinking his first coffee of the morning, already looking like a man who had made his decisions and was prepared to execute them. James Whitmore arrived at 7:30 with a leather case and an expression that was all business. "Cole will be there," Whitmore said, pouring himself coffee without being asked, which Eleanor had noticed was how he operated in every situation. "He'll have received the hearing notice by now. He'll have had his own attorney with him overnight preparing a counterposition." "What's his counterposition?" William said. "Best case for him, he argues that the power of attorney letters were preliminary drafts, not actual representations, and that the billing discrepancies were administrative errors." Whitmore sat down. "That's a weak argument, and he knows it, but it buys him time and confusion. Judges don't like rushing criminal fraud findings." "What's our counter to that?" Eleanor said. "The timeline," Whitmore said, looking at her. "The letters are dated. The billing charges are dated. The Denver correspondence is dated. If those letters were preliminary drafts, why are they dated 6 months apart? And why do they reference an existing negotiation in the present tense? Drafts don't do that." He paused. "I want you in that hearing room." Eleanor looked at him. "As what?" "As the person who found this," Whitmore said, "and built the documentation. If Cole tries to challenge the validity of the records, I want the person who assembled them available to answer questions." "Is that standard?" William said. "No," Whitmore said. "But neither is this situation. The documentation was assembled by a private individual, not a court officer. Cole will try to use that. I want to use it differently. The fact that it was assembled by someone without a financial stake in the outcome, other than being Carter's intended, actually helps us. She wasn't paid to find this. She found it because she was doing her job." Eleanor looked at William. "Do you want me in that room?" she said. "I want you wherever you want to be," William said. "This is your fight as much as mine." "Then I'll be in the room," Eleanor said. The county courthouse was a 30-minute ride, and they made it in 25 because William drove, and William did not waste motion on anything, including travel. Cole was already there when they arrived. He was standing in the corridor outside the hearing room with a man Eleanor didn't recognize, his attorney. She assumed a heavy-set man in a good suit, who had the particular posture of someone accustomed to winning. Cole saw them come in. His eyes moved to Eleanor and stayed there for a moment in a way that was not a threat and was not a retreat, but was a very clear assessment. She met it. She walked past him. Whitmore steered them into the hearing room, a plain functional space with a long table and chairs and a raised bench at the front where Judge Harlan was already seated. He was older than Eleanor had imagined from his reputation, perhaps 65, with the careful economy of movement that came from decades of sitting in rooms like this one and listening to people tell him things that were not entirely true. He looked at Eleanor when she came in. She looked back. She sat beside Whitmore and William at one side of the table. Cole and his attorney, she learned his name was Dunbar, brought up from a county 3 over, sat at the other. Judge Harlan looked at the room. "This is a preliminary evidentiary hearing on a fraud complaint filed by William Carter against Garrett Cole, pertaining to the alleged fabrication of power of attorney documentation and the alleged misappropriation of client funds," he said. His voice had the particular flatness of a man who had been doing this long enough that the words were a formality rather than a performance. "Mr. Whitmore, you filed the complaint and the supporting documentation. You have the floor." Whitmore stood. He was clean and efficient. He presented the timeline first. Eleanor had organized it exactly as he'd asked, chronologically, with the document references numbered in the margins, and he walked Judge Harlan through it without embellishment, just the sequence of events and the paper trail that supported each one. When he came to the two letters with the fabricated power of attorney, he placed them on the judge's desk. Judge Harlan read them. He read them slowly. The room was the particular kind of quiet that has weight in it. Then Harlan put them down. He looked at Cole. "Mr. Dunbar," he said. Dunbar stood with the comfortable authority of a man who had prepared for this. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that these letters exist. He disputes the characterization of them as fraudulent. These were preliminary draft communications, part of an exploratory legal process that never reached formal authorization. They were never intended to function as binding representations." "They're dated 6 months apart," Whitmore said. "Drafts can take time," Dunbar said smoothly. "They reference an existing negotiation in the present tense," Whitmore said. "March's letter references a February communication from the Midland Land Company. You don't reference future negotiations in the present tense in a draft." Dunbar pivoted. "The billing discrepancies were systematic," Whitmore said. 11 separate billing entries referencing work performed that does not appear in any Carter property file, covering an 18-month period, totaling what our documentation establishes as $412 charged to Mr. Carter's account for legal work conducted on behalf of a negotiation Mr. Carter did not authorize and was not informed of. Cole leaned over to Dunbar and said something in a low voice. Dunbar nodded. "Your Honor, the documentation relied upon by Mr. Whitmore was assembled by a private individual without legal training or court authorization. We question the reliability and the completeness of—" "I'd like to ask the individual a question," Judge Harlan said. The room went still. Dunbar paused mid-sentence. "Miss Hayes," Harlan said, looking directly at Eleanor, "you assembled this documentation." "Yes, Your Honor," Eleanor said. "How?" "By cross-referencing Mr. Cole's billing statements against the Carter property files," she said. "Each of the 11 billing entries references a document number. None of those document numbers correspond to any file in the Carter record system. I checked each one individually." She paused. "The 2 letters were found misfiled in a property survey folder. They were not removed from any proper filing location. They had no proper filing location in the Carter system because they were never entered into it." Harlan looked at her for a moment. "You have 11 years of account management experience," he said. He had clearly read the complaint in full. "Yes, Your Honor, including 2 debt restructuring processes and a water rights legal dispute on my family's property." "Self-taught?" "Entirely." Harlan nodded once. He looked at Dunbar. "The reliability objection is overruled. The methodology described is standard account reconciliation. Continue." Dunbar's composure held, but barely. Eleanor felt William's hand close briefly over her wrist under the table. Not a dramatic gesture, just a half-second of contact that said, "I saw that, and so did I." The hearing went for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Whitmore argued in tight, precise increments, never overreaching, never getting emotional. Eleanor had noted this about him from the beginning. He was a man who understood that restraint was itself an argument, that a case built cleanly without drama was more convincing to a judge than one that tried to be persuasive through volume. Dunbar tried 4 separate approaches. The draft argument. Whitmore dismantled it with the timeline. The administrative error argument for the billing discrepancies. Whitmore dismantled it by pointing out that administrative errors are random, and 11 systematic errors, all in the same direction, over 18 months were not random. A character argument, Cole's 20 years of service to the community, his reputation, the implausibility that a man of his standing would engage in fraud. Harlan gave this approximately 45 seconds of his attention before redirecting, and then Dunbar tried the 4th approach. "Your Honor," Dunbar said, "I'd like to raise a separate matter relevant to the credibility of the complaint. The relationship between Miss Hayes and Mr. Carter, which precipitated her involvement in the Carter property accounts, is itself irregular. Miss Hayes has no formal employment agreement, no defined scope of authority. She has my full authorization in writing," William said. Judge Harlan looked at him. "Mr. Carter, You'll speak when spoken to. Yes, Your Honor. But I want it on record she has my written authorization signed and dated for full account management access. Mr. Whitmore has a copy. Whitmore produced it. Harlan looked at it. Dunbar pressed on. The point, Your Honor, is that someone with Miss Hayes's background, a woman who came through a bride introduction platform who has no formal credentials, who has been in Mr. Carter's household for less than a month. Mr. Dunbar, Judge Harlan said. Dunbar stopped. Are you arguing that the documents are falsified? Harlan said. Or are you arguing that the person who found them is unqualified to have found them? A pause. The latter, Your Honor. Then you're arguing that correctly identified fraud becomes unimportant based on who identifies it, Harlan said. I don't find that persuasive. He looked at Cole directly. Mr. Cole, I'd like to hear from you. Cole stood. Eleanor had wondered what he would look like when the architecture of his position became clearly visible. She had expected either the wounded dignity of a man who believed his own version of events, or the cold performance of someone who had decided to maintain a face regardless of what it cost. He was the second kind, Your Honor. Cole said, I have served this county's legal community for 20 years. What's being presented here as fraud is a misunderstanding of complex preliminary legal processes that Miss Hayes, with all respect to her evident intelligence, does not have the training to correctly interpret. The power of attorney letters, Harlan said. You represented yourself in writing to the Midland Land Company as holding power of attorney over the Carter Southern parcel. Did you hold that power of attorney? A pause. The pause lasted too long. The letters were, Did you hold that authorization? Harlan said. Another pause. At the time of those communications, I was in the process of... Mr. Cole, Harlan said. Yes or no? The room was the heaviest kind of quiet. No, Cole said, not at the time of those specific letters. The word landed the way a verdict lands. Dunbar's pen stopped moving on his notepad. William was completely still beside Eleanor. Eleanor did not allow herself any expression whatsoever. Judge Harlan looked at Cole for a long moment. Then he looked at his papers. Then he looked at the room. I'm going to take a 30-minute recess, he said. When I return, I'll give my preliminary finding on the fraud complaint and my recommendation on whether this proceeds to criminal court. He stood. Everyone stood. The moment his door closed, the room exhaled. Whitmore turned to Eleanor and William immediately. He said no, Whitmore said in the quiet voice of a man stating an important fact. On the record, that's it. The case is made. What happens next? William said. Harlan finds the complaint credible, and he will. Cole just handed him the finding and refers it to criminal court. Cole's practice in this county is finished as of today, regardless of what happens in criminal proceedings. No client keeps an attorney who's been referred on fraud charges. Whitmore was gathering his papers with the efficient movements of a man transitioning from one phase to the next. The Southern parcel hold becomes permanent pending criminal proceedings. Midland Land Company's lawyers will pull out of the negotiation today or tomorrow. They don't want their firm's name anywhere near a fraud referral. And the land, Eleanor said. Stays with Carter, Whitmore said, where it always was. William was looking at the table. Eleanor watched him. She recognized what was on his face. Not triumph, not satisfaction. The particular expression of a man processing something that required both emotions and had no clean name for either. He had trusted Garrett Cole for 9 years. 9 years of being managed and advised and represented by a man who had been moving pieces toward a position that served himself. That was not a small thing to absorb. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on the table near his, not quite touching, just near. He looked down at it. Then he covered it with his. Judge Harlan came back in 28 minutes. He sat. He read his preliminary finding in the flat, precise language of a man who had spent a career making words do exactly what they were supposed to do and nothing else. The complaint was credible. The documentation was sufficient. The matter was referred to criminal court. The hold on the Southern Parcel property transactions was made permanent pending the resolution of criminal proceedings. Cole was ordered to surrender his case files pertaining to Carter properties to the court by end of business Friday. Cole stood straight through all of it. Dunbar took notes. When Harlan finished, he looked at the room and said, "Miss Hayes." Eleanor looked up. "The documentation you assembled in this case was thorough and clearly organized," Harlan said. "The court found it useful. That's not a common occurrence when materials are compiled outside the court system." "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. He nodded once. He left. So, Cole was in the corridor when they came out. Dunbar was beside him, already talking quietly with the focused energy of an attorney managing a client's next steps. Cole was listening, but his eyes moved when William and Eleanor emerged. He and William looked at each other. It was the particular look of men who have known each other for a long time and are in the process of acknowledging that something permanent has ended. There was no anger in William's face, no satisfaction, just the clean, clear lines of finality. Cole looked at Eleanor. She looked back at him. He said nothing. She said nothing. He turned and walked out with Dunbar. Eleanor watched him go. "Are you all right?" William said beside her. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'll get there." She nodded. She understood getting there. She had been getting there most of her life. The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the ride out had been. Whitmore peeled off at the main road, heading back toward the territorial capital with handshakes and the agreement that he'd send his final bill once the criminal referral paperwork was complete. Doug was waiting at the ranch gate the way he always seemed to be waiting, and he read the situation from their faces before the wagon stopped. "How bad?" he said. "It went our way," William said. Doug let out a breath he had probably been holding since the previous night. "Cole," he said. "Referred to criminal court," William said. "His practice in this county is finished." Doug was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. It came out with a weight that told Eleanor the 2 years he had spent knowing something was wrong with Cole had not been comfortable years. He took the horses. They went inside. What? The afternoon had a particular quality that follows high-stakes mornings, a kind of decompression that isn't quite peace and isn't quite exhaustion, but lives between the two. Eleanor made coffee. William sat at the kitchen table and looked at nothing for a while, which she understood was his version of processing, and she let him do it without filling the silence. Eventually he said, "I should have seen it sooner." "People don't look for what they trust won't be there," Eleanor said. "We covered this." "I know. I'm allowed to say it anyway." "You are," she said. He was quiet again. "He was at my first wife's funeral," William said. "He managed the estate paperwork when she died. He was—" He stopped. "He was someone I considered a friend. That's different from a business relationship." Eleanor sat down across from him. "I know the difference," she said. He looked at her. "I know what it is to trust someone you shouldn't have," she continued. "Not in the same way I've never had a business partner betray me. But I trusted a town for a year to see me clearly, and they didn't, and I had to decide what that cost me and what it didn't." She paused. "It costs you the trust. It doesn't have to cost you the capacity for it." William looked at her for a long time. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Stay that intact," he said. "After everything that's happened to you. You're the most—" He stopped searching. "You're the most intact person I've ever met." Eleanor considered that. "I'm not intact," she said. "I have plenty of damage. I just decided a long time ago that the damage was going to have to keep up with me, rather than the other way around." Something in his face shifted. It was the look she had started to recognize in the past weeks. The look that meant he had heard something that landed in a place he hadn't expected, that had gone somewhere true in him. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. They sat like that for a while, in the quiet kitchen of the ranch that was about to become fully hers. And outside the particular sounds of the afternoon went on, and neither of them needed to say anything to be in exact agreement about everything. The town's response came in the days following the hearing. Red Valley was a place that moved with the efficiency of a small, interconnected community when information was available, and the information about Cole and the hearing was very available. Whitmore had not been secretive about the referral. The courthouse was public. The finding was a matter of record. By Thursday, Eleanor could feel the shift when she walked through town. Not a dramatic shift. Not the kind of shift that announces itself with fanfare. The quieter, more substantial kind that happens when a community reassesses something they got wrong and tries to move forward without making too much of the moving. The feed store clerk was straightforwardly helpful. Frances Blythe crossed the street to say something warm and meant it. The minister's wife stopped Eleanor in front of the general store and said in a tone that had shed its careful neutrality entirely, "What you did for William Carter's property, the whole county owes you a debt." "I did my job," Eleanor said. "Not everyone would have done it that thoroughly," the minister's wife said. Eleanor thanked her and moved on. The more significant change was at the ranch. She noticed it first with Tomas the cattle manager, who had always treated her with respect. But a specific kind of respect, the respect you give to the boss's intended, calibrated and appropriate and somewhat bounded. After the hearing, the calibration changed. He came to her directly with a question about the winter feed calculations without first clearing it through William, which was a small thing and a significant thing at exactly the same time. Then 3 other workers shifted in the same direction over the same week. She didn't comment on it. She answered Tomas's question about the feed calculations, reviewed the numbers he brought her, found a shortfall in the projection that he had missed, and they corrected it together. Doug noticed. He always noticed. "They respect competence," he told her on Friday afternoon. "They've seen plenty of people with authority. Competence is rarer." "Tomas is competent," Eleanor said. "More competent than he was before you got here, because you've been talking through the supply numbers with him differently than William does," Doug said. "William manages from the top. You work it from the inside." Eleanor looked at him. "Is that a criticism?" "It's an observation," Doug said. "A favorable one." He paused. "You've changed how this ranch thinks. In 3 weeks." She didn't know what to do with that, so she filed it in the place where she filed things that required more time before she could respond to them accurately. The wedding was 4 days away when the last thing happened. She had not thought of Robert Aldous in weeks, had not thought about any of the 7 men in weeks, because the platform and its history had receded in the way things recede when your present becomes sufficiently full. But Aldous found her again, and this time it was not on a street corner with an awkward apology and arithmetic attached to it. He was in the general store when she came in on a Monday morning, and he was speaking with the storekeeper about something that stopped when she came through the door. She bought what she needed. She was nearly to the door when he said, "Eleanor." "Not Miss Hayes." "Eleanor." She turned. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has spent some time getting to a specific point and is now at it. "I told you before that I wanted to apologize," he said. "You told me that what I was offering wasn't an apology. You were right." She waited. "I came to the platform looking for a woman who would make my life simpler," he said. "I heard about what you'd been through, and I thought hard things produce hard people, and I didn't want a hard person. I wanted something easier." He stopped. "I've had 4 months to watch you from a distance. What you did with Carter's accounts. What you found. What happened in that courtroom." He looked at her directly. "You're not hard. I was too simple to know the difference." Eleanor looked at him. She was aware in that moment of everything she was carrying. The 4 months, the 8 mornings on the platform, the 7 men who had looked once and moved on the rooms in the boarding house, the nights with the ledgers, the hearing, the letter, the 2 cups of coffee at a gate in October. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "I mean it." He nodded. He seemed relieved in the way of someone who needed to say a thing more than they needed anything back from it. "I heard the wedding is Saturday," he said. "It is." "I hope it's everything you deserve," he said. She smiled. "I intend it to be," she said. She walked out. The street was the same street it had always been. But she moved through it differently, not with the careful, contained energy of a woman managing how much space she was allowed to take up, but with the ease of someone who has stopped asking permission for her own existence. Friday evening, the night before the wedding, William found her in the office. She was not working. She was simply sitting at the desk, with her hands on the surface of it, and looking at nothing in particular, which was her version of the thinking he did by walking to windows. He came and sat across from her. Didn't say anything. She looked at him. "I keep waiting to feel like I got lucky," she said. And I don't," she said. "That's not what this feels like." "What does it feel like?" he said. She thought about it honestly, because she didn't give him answers she hadn't thought about honestly. "It feels like something that was supposed to happen eventually did," she said. "Not luck, not rescue, just the right thing arriving when I had held on long enough for it to catch up." William was quiet for a moment. "7 men," he said. "7 men," she confirmed. "If any one of them had said yes," he said, "you wouldn't have been on the platform the 8th time." "I know," she said. "I almost didn't come," he said. "Doug pushed me for 3 weeks. I argued. I had reasons. I had dozens of reasons that all seemed valid and were all in different ways wrong." She looked at him. "What made you go?" she said. "He told me that the ranch was fine," William said. "That the business was fine. And that fine wasn't the same as enough." He paused. "And I knew he was right. I just needed someone to say it out loud." The office around them held all the evidence of the past weeks, the corrected ledgers, the restored property records, the clear and functional system that had not existed in this form before Eleanor's hands had moved through it. "This is yours too now," William said. "Everything here. Not because you married into it, because you earned it the same way I did by doing the work." Eleanor looked around the office. She thought about the farm, the debt letters, the cold kitchen, the ledgers she had kept by lamplight when she was 16, and the world was crushing down, and she had kept going because stopping wasn't something her nature permitted. She thought about the platform. 8 mornings, the end of the line. "I know," she said. And she meant it in a way she had never quite been able to mean anything before, not with gratitude, not with relief, not with the careful pleasure of something survived, but with the clean, certain knowledge of a woman who has always known her own worth and has simply been waiting for the world to catch up. Tomorrow, she would marry William Carter. Tonight, she sat in the office that was already hers and let that truth settle into her the way true things settle, not with noise, not with ceremony, but with the quiet permanence of something that has always been true and has simply finally been named. The morning of the wedding arrived the way the most important mornings do not, with fanfare, not with anything that announced itself as significant, but with the particular ordinary quality of a day that has decided to be extraordinary quietly. Eleanor was up before the sun, not from nerves, from habit, and from the specific alertness of someone whose life had trained her to treat important days with the same functional discipline as ordinary ones. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She listened to the ranch wake up around her, the animals, the distant movements of the early workers, the sounds of a living operation that did not stop for weddings or weather, or anything else that wasn't a direct physical emergency. She had been listening to those sounds for 3 weeks. She had already stopped noticing them the way you stop noticing the sound of your own heartbeat, not because they had become unimportant, but because they had become hers. William came downstairs at 6. He stopped when he saw her at the table. "You made coffee," he said. "I've made coffee every morning for 3 weeks," she said. "You didn't have to today." "I wanted to," she said. "Sit down." He sat down. She poured his cup. He looked at her across the table with those precise, honest eyes, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because the moment didn't need anything said in it. "How do you feel?" he said eventually. "Ready," she said. Not nervous. I'm always a little nervous before something important, she said. I just don't let it run the day. He drank his coffee. I've been trying to think of the right thing to say, he said. This morning, I've been thinking about it since Wednesday. Did you find it? No, he said. So I'm going to say the true thing instead, and you can judge whether it was the right thing after. He set his cup down. You are the best decision I have ever made. Not the most profitable, not the most strategic, the best. And I knew it on that platform, and I have understood it more completely every day since. Eleanor held his gaze. That was the right thing, she said. He nodded once. They finished their coffee. The ceremony was at 10 o'clock at the Red Valley Church. Simple was the word they had both used, and simple was what it was. The minister, a handful of witnesses, the honest words of a ceremony that neither of them had dressed up with ceremony for its own sake. Doug Pritchard was there standing straight in a jacket Eleanor had never seen him wear before, with the expression of a man attending something he has wanted to attend for longer than the event has been planned. Tomas came. Henry came, the young driver who had transported her boxes from the boarding house to the ranch, still wearing the expression of effortful courtesy he had apparently adopted as his permanent mode in her presence. Francis Blythe came. Eleanor noticed this and chose to notice it fully, not to minimize it, not to read too much into it, but to let it be what it was. A woman who had been unkind making the specific choice to be present at a moment that mattered. That was not a small thing. Eleanor had learned not to make small things of it when people tried. James Whitmore sent a letter. He was back at the territorial capital handling the criminal referral paperwork, but the letter arrived Friday evening, and it said in his characteristically efficient way that he was glad the case had resolved in the direction of justice, and that he hoped the subsequent occasion was everything it should be. Eleanor read it twice. Margaret Hollowell was not there. She had left Red Valley 2 weeks earlier quietly, and without incident, exactly as she had indicated she would. Eleanor had not seen her again after the general store. She thought about her occasionally not with hostility, not with triumph, just with the specific acknowledgement she gave to people who had behaved decently when decency was inconvenient. Margaret Hollowell had looked at the situation clearly and acted with integrity. That was worth something. The minister's name was Reverend Cross, and he was a man who understood that the people standing before him had already done the hardest work of choosing each other long before this moment, and that his role was to bear witness to something that had already essentially happened, rather than to create it through ceremony. He was brief, and he was sincere, and he did not fill the ceremony with language that was more about the occasion than the people. When he asked William if he took Eleanor Hayes as his wife, William said, "I do," in exactly the same tone he said everything unhurried complete, requiring nothing added to it. When he asked Eleanor if she took William Carter as her husband, she said, "I do," and felt the words land in her chest with the weight of things that are true. William put the ring on her finger. She looked at it for exactly 1 second, a plain gold band, nothing decorative, exactly what she would have chosen, and then she looked at him. He was already looking at her. The reception, such as it was, happened at the ranch. Mrs. Pruitt, the housekeeper, had apparently decided that simple did not have to mean sparse, and had spent the better part of 2 days producing the kind of food that made simple feel like abundance. Eleanor walked into the kitchen and ranch dining room and stopped at the sight of it. "Mrs. Pruitt," she said, "you said simple." Mrs. Pruitt said, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has found the exact line between a stated preference and an occasion's actual needs. "This is simple. You should see what I do for complicated." Eleanor laughed. It came out freely, which was something she was still getting used to. The way laughter came out of her now, without the careful management she had applied to it for years. When you spend a long time making yourself smaller, even your laughter gets managed. She was unmanaging it piece by piece. The afternoon went the way good afternoons go, with food and conversation, and the easy rhythm of people who are genuinely glad to be in the same place. Doug told a story about William's first season managing the eastern cattle that William disputed with such calm specificity that the dispute itself became the entertainment. Henry ate 3 plates of food and was politely mortified when Eleanor pointed this out. Tomas talked for 20 minutes with a seriousness that Eleanor matched fully about what the corrected winter feed calculations meant for the herd's condition come March. It was the most ordinary, extraordinary day she had ever lived through. They were married 11 days before Garrett Cole's criminal hearing. Eleanor had not put that calendar proximity out of her mind. She wasn't built for that kind of compartmentalization, and she didn't pretend to be. The Cole situation was not finished. The referral to criminal court had set a process in motion, and processes had timelines. And the timeline meant that the first week of her marriage was going to include sitting in a criminal courtroom. She told William this plainly on the morning of the second day. "I know," he said. "I haven't stopped thinking about it either." "Are you ready for it?" "I was ready for it before the wedding," he said. "The wedding didn't change that." "Good," she said. "Because Whitmore's coming Thursday. He wants to go through the final documentation before the hearing." William looked at her. "You already arranged the Thursday meeting," he said. "Yesterday," she said. "While you were in the North Pasture." "On our second day of marriage. I managed to find 15 minutes between breakfast and the supply order," she said. He looked at her with that expression, the one that wasn't quite a smile, but lived in the same neighborhood, the one she had started to understand was his version of being delighted by her, which he was too reserved to deploy as an actual smile, but too honest to entirely conceal. "You're remarkable," he said. "I'm efficient," she said. "There's a difference." "I'm not sure there is," he said. She went back to the ledger she was reviewing. But she was smiling too, in the private way she had, the one that didn't make a production of itself. Whitmore arrived Thursday as arranged. He sat across from Eleanor and William at the office table and went through the criminal hearing preparation the way he went through everything methodically, without drama, with a clarity that Eleanor respected more each time she worked with him. "Cole's attorney has filed a motion to suppress the 2 letters on the grounds that they were improperly obtained," Whitmore said. Eleanor looked at him. "They were misfiled in a property survey folder in William's own record system." "I know that," Whitmore said. "The argument is that you didn't have authority to access property survey files, specifically that your authorization covered active financial records, not historical property documentation." "The authorization William gave me was for full account management access," Eleanor said. "Full. The word is in the document." "I know what the document says," Whitmore said. "The motion is weak and I expect the judge to deny it, but I want you to be prepared for the possibility that they push hard on your authority to have touched those files." Eleanor looked at William. William looked at her. "Her authority was and is complete," he said. "I'll testify to that personally, if required." "You may be required," Whitmore said. "Then I'm ready," William said. Whitmore moved to the next item. Cole's second strategy is going to be character mitigation. He's going to bring 9 years of professional service records, community references, and professional commendations. He's going to ask the court to consider a financial settlement rather than criminal conviction. "No," William said. "I expected that answer," Whitmore said. "I want you to hold it when his attorney makes the offer sound reasonable in front of a judge, because they will make it sound reasonable. They're good at that." "It won't matter how it sounds," William said. "He fabricated legal authority to steal my land. That doesn't have a price." Whitmore nodded. He looked at Eleanor. "You'll be called to speak to the documentation again." "I'm ready," she said. "Different judge this time. Criminal court. More formal. He'll be more pointed in his questions." "Ask me something pointed," Eleanor said. Whitmore looked at her steadily for a moment. Then he leaned forward and said in the clipped, direct tone of a cross-examination, "Miss Hayes, Mrs. Carter, you have no formal legal training. You have no formal accounting certification. On what basis do you claim that your interpretation of these billing records is accurate?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "On the basis that numbers are not a matter of interpretation," she said. 11 billing entries reference document numbers that do not exist in the Carter filing system. I checked each one individually. That is not an interpretation, it is a count. Anyone with the ability to read a number and match it to a file can verify it. I welcome the court to do exactly that." Whitmore sat back. "Good," he said. "Say it exactly like that." The criminal hearing was on a Tuesday. The courthouse was more formal than the preliminary hearing, a larger room. More people. The specific weight of criminal proceedings that carries something the civil process doesn't. Eleanor had been in difficult rooms before. She had been in rooms with creditors who wanted her family's land, and rooms with men who had dismissed her in the first 30 seconds, and rooms where she was the only person who believed she was supposed to be there. This room was different in degree, not in kind. She was ready for it. Cole sat across the room with Dunbar beside him, and 2 additional attorneys she hadn't seen before. The expanded legal team was itself a statement, a show of resources, a way of making the room feel like the weight was on the other side. Eleanor noticed it. She noted it as information, and let it be information rather than intimidation. The judge was a man named Cowboy, perhaps 55, with the focused economy of someone who ran his courtroom, the way efficient people run operations, nothing wasted, nothing indulged, every minute accounted for. He looked at the room when the proceedings opened, and Eleanor had the clear impression that he had already read everything in front of him and was now deciding whether the room would confirm what he'd read. Dunbar filed the suppression motion first. Calloway denied it in 4 sentences. The authorization document was clear. Full access was full access. The motion was without merit. Proceed. Dunbar pivoted without visible disruption, which Eleanor credited. He was a professional, and professionals absorb adverse rulings and keep moving. The character mitigation came next. 9 years of professional service. Community references. Letters from 3 county officials attesting to Cole's reputation. Dunbar laid it out with genuine skill, building a portrait of a man whose single error of judgment, he did not use the word fraud. He never used the word fraud, was an aberration in an otherwise exemplary career. Then he made the offer. Full financial restitution. $412. An additional $2,000 in damages. Cole's immediate withdrawal from any claims related to the southern parcel. His resignation from the County Bar Association. It was, Eleanor recognized, a genuinely generous offer by any standard measure. It was also, she understood, designed to resolve the situation in a way that avoided a criminal conviction on record, which would protect Cole from the full weight of what he had done. Calloway looked at Whitmore. Whitmore looked at William. William said clearly enough for the room to hear without being asked, "We decline." Dunbar's expression managed itself. "Your Honor, the offer represents full compensation and more for any damages." "The damages aren't the point," Whitmore said. Mr. Cole represented himself in writing as holding legal authority. He did not possess to a third party for the purpose of conducting a transaction that would have permanently divested my client of 600 acres of productive property. That is criminal fraud. The appropriate resolution is a criminal finding, not a financial settlement. Calloway looked at Dunbar. "Does your client dispute that he sent the letters?" A pause. "He does not dispute the existence of the letters," Dunbar said carefully. "Does he dispute that he did not hold power of attorney at the time he sent them?" The pause this time was longer. "He does not dispute that the formal authorization had not yet been established," Dunbar said. "Then proceed," Calloway said. Eleanor was called to speak to the documentation at 11:15. She walked to the front of the room and stood with the same quality of stillness she had carried onto 8 bride platforms, not performance, not defiance, just the steady presence of someone who knows what they know and is prepared to say it plainly. Whitmore walked her through the documentation in sequence. She answered every question in the precise, measured way she had practiced with him. And the answers were clear, and the numbers supported the answers, and the cross-references supported the numbers. And when Dunbar stood up to cross-examine her, he had nothing to work with that Whitmore hadn't already anticipated. Dunbar tried the authorization angle again. Full access meant financial records, not property files. "Full access," Eleanor said. "The word full is not ambiguous." Dunbar tried the expertise angle. No formal training, no certification. The methodology was account reconciliation. Eleanor said. Matching billing references against existing files. The absence of any corresponding file for 11 billing entries is not a matter of expertise. It is a matter of presence or absence. The files were either there, or they were not. They were not. Dunbar tried one more angle. Mrs. Carter, he said, and the shift to her married name was deliberate. She heard the calculation in it, the attempt to relocate her from competent professional to recent bride with an interest in the outcome. You came to Carter's ranch as a prospective wife. Your access to these records was personal, not professional. Isn't it possible that your reading of these materials was colored by your personal relationship? The room was quiet. Eleanor looked at Dunbar. My personal relationship with William Carter is the reason I was in the records at all, she said. It is not the reason the document numbers are absent from the filing system. Those numbers were absent before I arrived. They will be absent after I leave this room. My relationship with my husband has no effect on whether a number exists in a file or not. Numbers are not personal. Calloway made a sound that was not quite commentary and not quite not. Dunbar sat down. The finding came at 2:15 in the afternoon. Criminal fraud on the first count. Misappropriation of client funds on the second. Cole was convicted on both. Sentencing would follow in 30 days. The southern parcel hold was confirmed as permanent. Cole's license to practice law in the territory was referred to the Bar Association for revocation proceedings. Cole stood straight through the reading of it. Eleanor watched his face. It was the face of a man who had understood since the preliminary hearing that this was the probable outcome and had spent the intervening weeks arriving at a position that was not acceptance, but was at least steadiness. She did not feel triumph looking at him. She felt the particular clean feeling of a thing completed, not pleasant, not unpleasant, just done. Dunbar was already speaking quietly in his ear when they led Cole toward the processing area. Cole looked back once. Not at William, at Eleanor. She held his gaze. He looked away first. William was quiet on the ride home. Not the processing quiet of the day after the preliminary hearing. This was different. This was the quiet of a man who has carried something for a long time and has finally set it down and is learning what his arms feel like without the weight. Eleanor let him have it. 20 minutes out from the ranch, he said, "It's over." "Yes," she said. "The land is safe." "The land was always yours," she said. "Now it's documented that way." He looked at the road ahead. "I keep thinking about the 9 years," he said. "I know. 9 years of trusting someone who was—" "Stop," Eleanor said gently but clearly. He looked at her. "You've thought about the 9 years enough," she said. "The 9 years are in the criminal record now. They belong to the court. You don't have to keep carrying them." He was quiet. "What do I carry instead?" he said. She looked at him. 42,000 acres, she said. 63 employees. An honest foreman who has worked for you for 16 years and rides letters through the dark when you need him to. A young driver who eats 3 plates of food at wedding receptions and is so earnest it's almost painful. A cattle manager who asks the right questions. She paused. "And a wife who found the fraud and built the case and will find the next problem and build the next case and will be there every morning with coffee, whether it's a good day or a bad one." William Carter looked at his wife. "Yes," he said. "I suppose I carry those." "You carry all of those," Eleanor said. He took her hand, kept it. They rode the rest of the way home like that, hand in hand on the wagon seat, in the particular silence of two people who have been through something hard together and have come through it to the other side and are now simply in the ordinary, necessary, extraordinary business of continuing. The years that followed were not without difficulty. Eleanor would not have trusted a life without difficulty. She had learned too early what smooth surfaces concealed to put much faith in them. There were hard winters and dry summers and the ordinary crises of a large working operation. Equipment failures and disputes with neighboring properties, and the slow grinding work of keeping something as complex as Carter's ranch functioning at the level it was meant to function. There were disagreements between her and William, real ones, about real things conducted in the plane. Direct way they both conducted everything, resolved the same way. There was the year the eastern cattle contracted a respiratory illness that cost them a third of the herd and nearly broke the season's numbers. Eleanor worked through that one 16 hours a day for 3 weeks, restructuring the supply costs and renegotiating contracts and finding every margin that could be found to keep the operation from ending a year in the red. They didn't end in the red. It wasn't comfortable, but they didn't. There was the water rights dispute in the 3rd year of their marriage, a different parcel and a different antagonist. A developer from the east who had purchased land adjacent to the Carter property and immediately began challenging the established water channel boundaries. Eleanor handled that one from the documentation side, while William handled the negotiation side, and they moved through it as they moved through everything, side by side, each doing the part they did best, neither waiting for the other to manage something they could manage themselves. Whitmore became their regular legal counsel, and eventually something closer to a friend in the way that people who have been in serious situations together sometimes become friends with the particular trust that comes from knowing how someone behaves when the stakes are real. Doug Pritchard retired in the 5th year. He gave 2 months' notice, which was characteristic. He sat down with William and Eleanor together and told them what he was doing and when, and then he spent the 2 months systematically transferring everything he knew to the people who would carry it after him, which was also characteristic. On his last day, he came to find Eleanor in the office. "I want to say something," he said. "Then say it," she said. "When William told me he was going to that platform," Doug said, "I thought he was going to come back with someone pleasant, someone who would make the house warmer, and let him focus on the ranch without worrying about what he was going home to." He paused. "I did not expect you." Eleanor looked at him. "Is that a compliment?" she said. "It's the truth," he said. "Which is better?" He put out his hand. She shook it, and then she did something that surprised him. She stepped forward and put her arms around him in a brief, firm embrace that he received with the flustered dignity of a man who doesn't know what to do with being hugged, and is grateful for it anyway. He left. Eleanor went back to the ledger. The letters from Samuel started arriving in the 4th year. Her brother had eventually tracked her down through the Red Valley postmaster, and his first letter was cautious, the letter of someone who left, and knows they left, and is uncertain of their welcome. Eleanor read it twice, and wrote back the same day. Not effusively. Not with the performed warmth of someone trying to make something easier than it was. Honestly, which was the only mode she had ever really had. They rebuilt something over the course of that correspondence. Not exactly what they'd had before the farm, before the losses, before the years of separation. Something new grown between adults, who had both become themselves in the interval. Samuel eventually came to visit with his wife and their 2 children, and Eleanor watched William with those children, careful and genuine, and quietly delighted, and felt something that she had carried a long time without naming it finally name itself. She was happy. Not the temporary happiness of good circumstances, but the kind that runs underneath everything else, the foundation kind. The kind that holds when the surface gets difficult. She had not been sure she was capable of it once. She was certain of it now. 5 years after the wedding, Red Valley held a community gathering to recognize local citizens who had contributed to the county's development. It was the kind of thing Red Valley did periodically, a combination of civic ceremony and social event, and Eleanor would not have attended, except that William was being recognized for his role in expanding the county's infrastructure, and the recognition required his presence. She sat beside him through the ceremony. Several names were read. Several commendations were given. And then the minister, Reverend Cross, who had married them and had developed over the years into something like an ally, stood and said that there was one additional recognition that hadn't been on the official program, but that the organizing committee had agreed was overdue. He said Eleanor Carter's name. He said it for the work she had done on the coal case, which had protected not just the Carter property, but had set a precedent that subsequent property fraud cases in the territory had relied upon. He said it for the management practices she had brought to the Carter operation, several of which other ranchers in the county had adopted. He said it for the informal financial counsel she had extended to 3 families in the county who had faced debt situations similar to what she had once navigated herself. She had not known about those 3 families being mentioned publicly. She had helped them privately, which was how she preferred to help, not from a position of charity, but from a position of knowledge freely shared. The way she would have wanted someone to share knowledge with her when she was 16 and desperate and alone at a kitchen table with debt letters she didn't know how to answer. The room was applauding. Eleanor sat for exactly 1 second before she stood. She walked to the front of the room. She thanked Reverend Cross. She thanked the committee. She stood in front of the room that had once whispered about her, that had once categorized her and shelved her, and looked past her, that had once contained men who walked to the end of the line and then walked away, and she felt no bitterness toward any of it. She felt gratitude, not the soft kind, the earned kind, the kind that comes from understanding exactly how difficult the path was and being glad you walked it anyway, because the path was the reason you arrived where you arrived. She spoke briefly. She was not a person who used more words than a situation required. She said that she was grateful to be part of a community that had given her the opportunity to contribute, and she meant it, and she sat down. William's hand found hers under the table. She squeezed it once. That night after the gathering, they sat on the porch of the main house. The sounds of the ranch at night were something Eleanor knew by heart, now every rhythm and shift of them, the way you know the breathing of a place you have lived in long enough that it has become part of you. "You should have told me about the 3 families," William said. "You knew about 2 of them," Eleanor said. "Not the Harpers. The Harpers didn't want anyone to know," she said, "including you. I honored that." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been doing that?" he said. "Finding people in debt situations and helping them work through it." "Since the 2nd year," she said. "When I had enough distance from my own situation to be useful to someone else's." "You never mentioned it." "It wasn't mine to mention," she said. "It was theirs." He was quiet again. "Eleanor," he said. She looked at him. "Do you know what you are?" he said. "I have some ideas," she said. "I'm going to tell you anyway," he said. "Because I should have said this more explicitly and more often, and I'm correcting that now." He looked at her with those eyes, the honest, precise eyes that had looked at her on the platform like a person worth looking at, that had never in 5 years looked at her as anything less. "You are the most capable person I have ever known. Not the most capable woman, the most capable person. And you are the best thing that has ever happened to this ranch, and to me, and I want you to know that I know it, and that I will keep knowing it for the rest of my life." Eleanor looked at her husband. She thought about the platform, the 8 mornings, the end of the line, the leather suitcase, the rented room, 7 men who looked once, the silence of crowds who had decided about her before she had said a word. She thought about the ledgers and the letters and the courtroom and the cold October morning at a gate with 2 cups of coffee. She thought about what it had cost to keep going when stopping would have been so much easier, and what it had produced, and whether she would change any of it, and the answer was no. Not the platform, not the rejections, not the years of surviving alone, not the nights in the rented room when the belief frayed at the edges and she had to hold it together with both hands until morning. All of it had led here, to a porch on a ranch that was hers, to a man beside her who had looked twice when 7 others had looked once, to a life that had not been handed to her or rescued into existence, but built piece by piece with her own hands from everything she had endured and refused to be broken by. "I know you know it," she said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. The ranch made its sounds in the dark around them a live, steady reel. And Eleanor Carter, who had once stood at the end of a line that nobody wanted to reach, who had been called too old and too hard and too much and not enough, who had packed and unpacked the same leather suitcase 8 times and walked back to the same platform and refused, absolutely refused to let the world's low opinion of her become her own. Eleanor Carter sat in the life she had built and felt it hold her solid and unshakable in every direction. 7 men had looked at her and seen a woman they didn't want. 1 man had looked at her and seen the woman he could never live without. And he had spent every day of the years since proving that he was right. She was the wife of his life. And he was the proof that the right thing, if you hold on long enough, will always find its way to you.